Chapter 622. Needless to say, the things Yinjiao brought out were out of everyone's expectations. They thought that the tribes that were forced to migrate would have a harder life. But not only were they living well in their new place, they were even able to host such a lavish feast. They wondered how much more Yinjiao was hiding. In reality, Yinjiao was right. Most of the grains they brought out were harvested from the fearsome beast forest last year, before the cataclysm. Now Yinjiao had a much larger plot of land. Other than the 8 types of grains that made up the 8 treasures porridge, there were also some newly planted grains that were also well adapted. It was just that they weren't ripe yet, so they couldn't be harvested. That was why they didn't bring it out for these people to eat. As for the 1,000-grain gold, dream on. That was for the Yinjiao people to eat. It was much more precious than the grains Jiju gave them. They didn't even have enough for their own people, so how could they bring it out for these foodies? Even if they were hiding something, Yinjiao was confident in what they brought out. They didn't feel embarrassed. Other than the well-known fearsome beasts and animal hides, the fact that they brought out food and porridge meant that they had arable land, seeds, and could grow high-quality crops. I don't need to say much about the quality of Yinjiao's crops. As long as you're not an idiot, you can tell. There's no need for us to prove it. There were seasonings and home-brewed wine. In the future, don't say that Yinjiao doesn't know anything. The Flaming River Trading Point would have both of these. Since the Flaming River Trading Point could provide so many things, and Yinjiao would guarantee the safety of the trading point, it was possible that the trading point would become more lively in the future. Especially in the Flaming River region, the tribes were still living a life of hunger and hunger. The existence of the trading point would allow them to make the most of what they brought out. Many people understood this, especially the drumming tribe. They had already tasted the benefits of the trading point. Looking at the situation now, there was still a lot of potential for growth. It would only get better in the future. It was good that Yinjiao didn't lack meat. As long as Yinjiao had a surplus of meat, they could trade for more food from Yinjiao. Although the grains they had eaten earlier were also very good, they still preferred the meat of the vicious beasts. Crystals of the same size could definitely be exchanged for more vicious beast meat than grains. Even though Yinjiao didn't directly state this point, Gigu could tell from how precious the porridge was. 8 treasures porridge, 8 treasures, 8 kinds of precious grains, must be extremely difficult to grow. The people of the drumming tribe didn't have much talent in planting. Even if they dug up trees with strong vitality from the mountains, they could still plant them to death. This was why they always felt that planting was more difficult than hunting. The technical challenge was too great, and the things that were hard to obtain would be more precious. This was the reason why those grains were more expensive than the meat of vicious beasts. For the tribes that had not yet become well off, and had been living below the poverty line, they could only exchange for ordinary grains. After the cabbage and 8 treasures porridge buffered them, the meat dishes were served again. Huge red roasted beast paws and claws were placed on a plate in front of each tribe. The sharp claws were still attached to the toe bones, so they had to be taken apart and eaten. Then the dumb bird eggs were served to the tribes one by one. Most of the tribes from the central region had eaten dumb bird eggs before. Some of the tribes on the border might have also eaten dumb bird eggs if they traveled to other trading areas. After all, the Lu tribe was quite famous for their beasts and dumb bird eggs. The people of the Lu tribe who were present couldn't be more familiar with these things. However, most of the time, when they ate stupid bird eggs, they would boil them or eat them raw. They would rarely add other seasonings. This was especially true for people who often traveled. It was already good enough that they could eat outside. Where would they find the time to do such troublesome things? At this moment, the dumb bird eggs served at the Flaming Horns banquet had been boiled, peeled off the shell, and cooked with spices and seasoning plants. After cooking, the dumb bird eggs had a light reddish-brown color. On the steaming stone plate, the stupid bird eggs, which had been cooked to a brownish-red color, were cut into 8 small pieces and placed on the stone plate. There was even a thin layer of broth on top. The method of cooking the eggs was suggested by Xiao Xian. When they were preparing for the banquet, he also supervised the entire process. In the middle of the stone plate, there was a bright yellow flower. It was especially eye-catching among the brownish-red eggs. Among the 4 petals, there was something that looked like a flower bud with a crack in the middle. There were even some hard wooden thorns in it. Xiaoxian was speechless. This wasn't his idea. Someone from the logistics department had learned the beauty of setting up a plate on their own, without a teacher. Although the flower smelled sweet, it was actually a carnivorous plant in the forest. It could directly swallow an adult. Speaking of this, although it had been more than 10 years since they came to this world, they still remembered some things. Xiaoxian could still guide them to make more exquisite dishes. Not to mention the taste. At least the presentation would definitely be amazing. But this was the custom of the tribes. Even the big tribes in the central region were more particular than the other tribes, but they didn't get tired of eating fine food. If the Flaming Horn tribe's tricks were too intricate, they would go overboard and backfire. There was a limit to everything, a buffer period. Yinjiao's dishes today were just right. They didn't need to be more exquisite. As for why there were only dumb bird eggs and not green duck eggs, it was the same reason why they only took out a portion of the grains, and not the 1,000-grain gold. Better and more precious things were better left for their own people to enjoy. Although the purpose of the banquet was to show off their wealth, showing off didn't mean revealing everything. Yinjiao actually had a lot of things hidden away. The veins of the sky were still a secret. They had never thought of making these things public. Eggs, wine, meat, vegetables, grains, a combination of meat and vegetables. There was enough meat to fill their stomachs. Round after round of dishes were sent into the hall. The people who had empty stomachs before the banquet were now so full that they had to stand up. Eating a mouthful took a lot of effort. After a while, they would change their posture and eat again. The tribes at the front didn't lack food, so they were more restrained. They only ate fresh food. Their purpose in coming wasn't to eat, but to find out more about Yinjiao. However, after coming here, Yinjiao's behavior made them panic and lose their appetite. Some of the people at the back, who came for food, were already rolling their eyes. The standard for a successful banquet was to have a lot of food left after the banquet. This was a rule that every tribe on the continent knew. Therefore, although the people in the hall were almost done eating, the dishes were still being served. The chief of the Ji tribe, Abuli, stood up and took a deep breath. He walked a few steps and changed his posture a few times to see which position he could continue eating. There was still fresh meat on the stone plate in front of him. The meat was roasted very fragrant. Because of the different types of fearsome beasts, the meat looked much more delicate. There were even some patterns on the roasted meat, but he couldn't eat anymore. The amount of meat in his stomach had already exceeded his alert range. The so-called alert range meant that after reaching a certain level, it would seriously affect his reaction and escape speed when he encountered danger. When he reached the alert range, he hesitated. In the end, his appetite and mentality won out, and he continued eating. Now he was panting even when he walked. As chief, what should we do? A warrior from the Ji tribe who came with Abuli to the banquet said with a long face. There's so much meat, what should we do? They could see it, but they couldn't eat it. This used to be something that would wake them up laughing in their dreams. Now their dreams had come true, but at the same time, they also felt helpless. There was so much meat. If they couldn't finish it, it would be a waste to leave it. Just looking at it made their heart ache. Can we take it away? Someone asked. Abuli also wanted to bring it back if he couldn't finish it, but this was Yinjiao's territory. Everything was decided by Yinjiao. A small tribe like theirs didn't have much say. Why don't you ask later? Abuli's wife suggested. Oh. Abuli didn't have much confidence. He really didn't have the confidence, but when he looked at the pile of meat in front of him, he gritted his teeth. If Yinjiao didn't agree, he would try to negotiate with the Yinjiao people. When they saw the piles of meat in front of the 24 tribes, the Yinjiao people looked at each other and nodded at Gigu. Everyone, Gigu said loudly. The Flaming River Grand Banquet is almost over. How does everyone feel? Very good, very good. Very good. The people from the Hui and Lu tribes said loudly. The people at the other seats also praised. Even the people from the Longboat tribe and Tianshan tribe, who didn't like Yinjiao, had to admit that Yinjiao really did make this grand banquet. Not only was there enough food, but there were also some dishes that surprised them. There were also golden wine vessels placed in each tribe's seating area. This was also a display of wealth. Since that's the case, before the banquet ends, I, Gigu, as the current chief of Yinjiao, would like to announce that the Flaming River Trading Point is officially open from today onwards. As for the rules of the Flaming River Trading Point, Elder Zheng Luo will announce them. Gigu gestured to Zheng Luo with his hand. Zheng Luo took out an animal skin scroll that he had prepared beforehand. After opening it, he began to read the words on it. The animal skin scroll listed some of the rules of the Flaming River Trading Point. Many of them were borrowed from the slave masters in the other world. Xiao Xian also pointed out some flaws and improved them to create version 1.0 of the Flaming River Trading Point rules. If there were other additions or improvements in the future, it would be upgraded. In summary, other than the rules of the Flaming River Trading Point, other than the accommodation of each tribe, the rental of houses, the storage of goods and so on, the most important point was that no robbing was allowed in the Flaming River Trading Point. This made the small tribes around the Flaming River area feel relieved. What were they most afraid of when they traded? They were afraid that the other party would act shamelessly and use underhanded methods. However, if they had the protection of a powerful tribe like Yinjiao, it would be much safer for them to trade. Zheng Luo explained the rules on the scroll in his hand one by one. Then, he ordered his men to send out 24 copies of the same scroll to the leaders of the various tribes. There were even more detailed explanations on the animal skin scroll. If anyone still did not understand, they could ask the person in charge of the Flaming River Trading Point after the banquet. The Flaming River Trading Point was also the purpose of this banquet. After this was explained, everyone thought it was time for the banquet to end. However, just when everyone thought the banquet was finally over, the Yinjiao people said two more things. First, if the tribes did not finish their food, they could bring it out of the Flaming River Castle and give it to the people in the trading point who could not enter the venue. Of course, Yinjiao would not force them to bring it out. This made Abuli and the others so excited that they almost jumped up. They could bring it out. It would not go to waste. Even if they could not finish it today, they could continue eating tomorrow. They could leave the trading point after they finished eating. Finally, they did not feel the pinch anymore. This was within everyone's expectations. The tribes that had held banquets before had all said something similar. That was why they were not surprised by the first point. However, the second point that Yinjiao was about to say confused many people. After explaining the solution to the remaining food, Gigu continued with the second point. The Flaming River banquet has ended for everyone. You may leave now. If you have something to discuss, please wait in the resting area. Yinjiao still has a sacrificial ceremony. Of course, you can stay and watch if you want, but I don't recommend it. The more the Yinjiao people said this, the more curious the others became. Sacrificial ceremony? Hearing this, everyone did the same thing. They all turned their necks and looked around carefully. There was no fire pit. They had been eating here for half a day, and there was no fire pit. Without a fire pit, without a fire seed, how would they perform the ceremony? Would they make a fire themselves? Chapter 623. Everyone knew that ceremonies of great significance were usually held next to the fire pit. The deciding factor wasn't the fire pit, but the fire seed in the fire pit. Wherever the fire seed was, the tribesmen would gather there. It didn't matter where the fire pit was, or how big it was. The tribesmen only cared about the fire seed. However, at this moment, the Yinjiao tribe that had just held a grand banquet was telling them that they were going to hold a ceremony here. In a place that wasn't even Yinjiao's headquarters? It was hard to understand. As for Gigu's advice, from their point of view, Yinjiao was clearly trying to hide something. There was obviously a secret here that they didn't want them to see. Their minds raced. Some people felt like they had discovered a secret, and their eyes lit up. Initially, after the feast, they were thinking about how to find out more about the Flaming Horn tribe's secrets, especially about the fire seed. The Mang tribe and a few other famous tribes in the central region had used various methods to obtain information about the Flaming Horn tribe on their way here. Especially the movements of the Drumming tribe's fire seed during the winter, and the movements of the Rain Tribe's fire seed after the winter ended. They were very curious and wanted to find out more about the Flaming Horn Tribe's fire seed. Coincidentally, the chiefs and shamans of the Rain and Drumming Tribe would be attending the Flaming River Grand Banquet. Everyone planned to have a chat with the chiefs of these two tribes after the banquet. A small tribe like this wouldn't reject a conversation with a big tribe like theirs. However, if they wanted to know the most accurate and core secrets, it would be best to ask the Flaming Horns. However, the Flaming Horns had always been a hot-tempered tribe, and they didn't have a good relationship with each other. Perhaps they wouldn't be able to hear the secret, and they might even be ridiculed. Who knew that this would give them a chance? The ceremony was definitely related to the fire seed. How could they miss such a good opportunity? Seeing was believing. The answer they got from Yinjiao would definitely be the most accurate. Leave? Of course not. The Yinjiao people wanted them to leave, but they had to stay here and watch. They wanted to see what the Yinjiao people would do. Therefore, the person who was walking towards the Beast Fong gate of the Flaming River Castle turned around and stopped. But they didn't walk back to where they were sitting. Since he was close to the door, it would be easier for him to leave if anything happened. Looking around, it was obvious that everyone was thinking the same thing. They stopped near the Beast Fong gate. As for the Drumming Tribe and other smaller tribes, they walked out of the Beast Fong gate. They couldn't find a good place to stay, so they were timid and curious. They could only stick their heads out of the gate and watch from afar. The people of the Drumming Tribe and the Rain Tribe looked at each other and left without hesitation. They absolutely did not want to stay here. However, they were also a little curious. Therefore, after they walked out of the door, they walked for a distance before stopping to find a place to sit. They had eaten too much and were tired of standing. Inside the Flaming River Castle, Gigu wasn't surprised by the reactions of the tribesmen. It was as if he had expected this. After a cursory glance, Gigu looked at the elders and asked Xiaoxian first. "Shall we start now?" Gigu asked. "We can start now," Xiaoxian said. The other elders nodded in succession. The members of the Flaming Horn Tribe stood up and moved the tables, chairs, stools, dining utensils, and other things away from where they were sitting. They left an empty space in front of the Flaming River Tower, and then stood in a row on both sides of the tower. The elders stood at the front, followed by the team leaders, then the small team leaders. Behind them were some outstanding warriors who had contributed greatly to the tribe, or some respected elders, etc. There were 3 people who were different from these 2 rows of people. The current chief and shamaness didn't stand on either side like the others. Instead, they stood in front of the Flaming River Tower, facing the grayish-white stone wall without any carvings. Yinjiao's head elder, Xiaoxian, stood with the current chief and shamaness in front of the Flaming River Tower. In the hall, where the other 24 tribes had sat before, there were still leftover utensils, soup and chewed bones on the ground, and the firewood that hadn't finished burning was still crackling. The remaining soup in the stone pots and stone cauldrons was boiling and bubbling, and steam kept rising from them. The Yinjiao people hadn't cleaned up all of these. Actually, this was a common practice among the tribes. On the day of the Flaming River Grand Banquet, they wouldn't clean up these things. They would leave them for everyone to see as much as they wanted. These were the medals of the Grand Banquet for everyone to admire. They would wait until the next day, when everything was cold and the steam had dissipated. Then they would clean up these things. Therefore, only the area where the Yinjiao people were standing had been cleaned up. When everyone was in position, Gigu raised his head and looked at the top of the Flaming River Tower. At the top of the tower, beside the Yinjiao totem flag, stood a person. He was leaning out and looking down, obviously waiting for them. It was Mao, who had cooperated with Aoxian before. At this moment, Mao was already standing at the top of the Flaming River Tower, with Tuo and Taozheng beside him. When Mao, who was leaning down, received Gigu's signal, he took out a huge horn that was almost as tall as he was. There were clear circular patterns on the horn. This horn was made from the horn of a fearsome beast in the forest. It was a great honor to not be standing at the bottom, but to blow the horn here. This was a privilege that he had snatched from Lei after competing with him. Mao stretched his arms and did some chest exercises. then took a deep breath and slowly exhaled. Finally he lifted the horn, took a deep breath and blew. Woo! The low sound of the horn was like a muffled thunder from the horizon, carrying with it a vigorous force that seemed to transcend time and space, and travel even further. The ground was trembling, as if an ancient giant beast had stomped on the ground. Following the sound of the horn, the Yinjiao people who were busy working in the Flaming River trading point all sped up their work. They wanted to finish what they were doing as soon as possible. If they couldn't finish it in a short time, they would just put it aside and tidy up their clothes. They would get water to wash the dirt off their faces, and change into a clean set of clothes. When the team that was in the middle of transporting goods heard the low sound of the horn, the leader quickly found a place to rest and reorganized the team. The fearsome beasts that were transporting the goods also obediently followed the leader's instructions. As for Cha-Cha, when the horn sounded, it threw down its things, turned around, and flapped its wings as hard as it could, flying away. Yinjiao's sacrifice had nothing to do with it. The sound of the horn traveled through the forest around the Flaming River. The crocodiles of the drumming tribe all looked up in the direction of the Flaming River trading point, their cold eyes filled with doubt. On the other side of the Flaming River, the sound of the horn could be heard clearly. Although it was much quieter, they could still hear it clearly. The man who was playing with the duck food dropped the duck food in his hand and ran back to his house. The man who had been working in the field and was covered in dirt also ran to the wooden house beside the field to wash and change into clean clothes. The guards were already prepared, so they didn't need to change their clothes. However, their expressions became much more serious. If they saw someone who didn't know what to do, they would urge them to do what they were supposed to do. After the first sound of the horn, the people who stayed in the Flaming River Castle thought that Yinjiao was summoning people. However, after waiting for a long time, no one came in. What was going on? Everyone was confused. In the Flaming River Tower, about half an hour after Mao blew the first sound of the horn, Taozheng looked at the hourglass that Xiao Xian made out of crystal beside him. When the hourglass was almost empty, he warmed up, then turned the hourglass upside down, and took out another horn. This horn was thinner and longer than the one Mao blew just now. The color of the horn was lighter, and there weren't any ring-shaped patterns on it. This horn was made from two different fearsome beasts' horns. After taking out this horn, Taozheng took a deep breath like Mao and blew the second horn. Woo! Unlike the first horn, which was deep and forceful, this second horn was gentler. It was similar to a normal horn, but it was louder and had a wider range. The spreading sound waves were like an invisible hand, smoothing out all the chaos. At this time, almost all the Yinjiao people had already packed up and were waiting. In the Flaming River trading point, the people from the other tribes were still wondering why the horn sounded in the Flaming River Castle. Then, they saw the Yinjiao people tidying up and walking out of their houses. Then, they stood in the direction of the Flaming River Castle. The patrolling warriors also lined up on the spot after the second horn sounded and stood in the direction of the Flaming River Tower. On the way from Yinjiao's headquarters to the Flaming River trading point, the people who were resting all stood up with solemn expressions and stood in the direction of the Flaming River trading point. Even the few fearsome beasts that were resting on the ground got up and stood up. In Yinjiao's headquarters, everyone, whether they were on the mountain or at the foot of the mountain, had already come out of their houses and stood in the direction of the horn. After Taozheng blew the second horn, the interval was shorter than the first two. When the hourglass was only half empty, Tua, who had been waiting at the side, took out the third horn. This bugle horn was also the thinnest and longest of the three bugle horns. Taking a deep breath, Tua blew the third horn. Woo! It wasn't as deep as the first horn, nor was it as gentle as the second horn. This horn sounded loud and resonant, as if it could stir up everyone's emotions and bring them to the peak. In the hall, the utensils on the stone table shook with the sound waves and made smacking sounds. The pots that used to hold the 8 treasures porridge, the bottles that used to hold wine, and the rest of the utensils shook rapidly. A crack appeared on the surface of the utensils, and then the utensils broke with a bang. This horn didn't last long. It was like a whistle announcing a decision. This meant that the sacrifice had officially begun. Seeing the newly appointed witch from Yinjiao take a step forward, as if she was about to start the sacrifice, everyone who had been watching was shocked. Was the sacrifice finally about to start? Wait, why didn't they gather everyone? They didn't even have everyone. What was the point of a sacrifice? Chapter 624. First, they didn't gather any tribesmen. Second, they didn't have a fire seed. How were they going to perform the ritual? This was what everyone who stayed in the venue and stuck their heads out at the door of the beast tooth pendant were thinking. Were the Yinjiao people joking? It didn't seem like it. Whether it was the atmosphere or the Yinjiao people's formation, it didn't seem like they were joking. They were serious. Guizhe took a step forward. As the new shaman, she would be the one to chant the ritual incantation. Guizhe's voice wasn't loud, but the incomprehensible incantation was like a rhythm that wouldn't fade away. It spread from the flaming river castle to every corner. As Guizhe chanted the incantation, the Yinjiao people were facing the stone wall of the flaming river tower that had no decorations at all suddenly burst into flames. It was as if an invisible pen was using the flames as ink to draw on the wall. The Flaming River Grand Banquet started in the morning and lasted until the afternoon. At that time, the sun was already setting. After that, Yinjiao's preparations lasted for almost an hour. At this time, the clouds in the sky were bright red, as if there was a fire burning. Some places were already showing the color of dusk. The afterglow of the setting sun shone into the flaming river castle. It swept past the bones of the giant beasts that were embedded in the walls of the hall. It swept past the stone tables and the floor. It swept past the shiny bronze wares, the colorful stone wares, and the broken pottery wares that couldn't be kept intact under the sound of the horn. The wall of the flaming river tower just happened to receive the last rays of the sun. Under the fading rays of the setting sun, the shadows started to spread. However, the flames that appeared replaced the shadows where Yangguang had disappeared. Gradually, a diagram formed by flames appeared. It became clearer and more complete. The flames formed a pair of horns that were connected at the bottom and curved upwards, one inside and one outside. The two horns were surrounded by flickering flames. That was Yinjiao's totem. The two former shamans leaned on their crutches. Through their misty eyes, they looked at the ancient totem that had existed for thousands of years on the stone wall. The two horns, one inside and one outside, came from the same source. One was a strong appearance, the other a strong heart. An unyielding life, an unchanging faith. Another wish of the two old men had been fulfilled. Yinjiao was a tribe with a long history. Only through existing records and the accounts of generations of Yinjiao people, they still could not clearly understand what the situation was like in Yinjiao in the past. Too much time had passed, and they could no longer see the glory of the past. But they will create the present and the future. A Yinjiao ancestor once said in his notes that when a tribe could hold a banquet without any scruples or reluctance, it was a symbol of the tribe's rise. Why had the Wuxia tribe always been excluded from the big tribes back then? Even if they had the ability to bully other small and medium-sized tribes, often attacking and robbing other tribes, and frequently showing their existence, they had never really been recognized by the world. The kindling and history weren't the main reasons. People would not always look at a tribe the same way just because of its past glory. The world's view would always change. Strength was always accompanied by the word rich. Strength and resources. They only had the strength to fight outside, but they didn't have enough resources. Every time they went out to rob, the food they snatched was only enough to sustain their own lives. This kind of tribe had always been despised by many other tribes. The Wuxia tribe didn't have the ability to hold a banquet, and they had never thought of holding one for outsiders. Yinjiao had destroyed the Wuxia tribe and showed their existence more than once. In other words, in terms of strength, they were actually recognized. Especially the strange strength of the Yinjiao people. It had left a deep impression on those who had met the Yinjiao people. But the world had never really compared Yinjiao to the big tribes of today. Just like how many people used to look at the Wuxia tribe, they would think, what's the use of just fighting me? Do you have wealth? Do you have enough food? People were realistic, and in their traditional way of thinking, enough food was the standard to measure everything. It didn't matter if it was food obtained through other methods, or from hunting. These were all important indicators of whether a tribe was a big tribe or not. A strong tribe might not have enough food, but a tribe that had enough wealth and dared to show off their wealth was definitely a big tribe. This was the view of most tribesmen on the mainland, a traditional way of thinking that had persisted for thousands of years. The drumming tribe wouldn't come and suck up to Yinjiao just because they were strong, but when they knew that Yinjiao had enough food, they came over even without Yinjiao saying anything. There were many people who thought like this in the drumming tribe. This was also the reason why the Flaming Horns tribe valued this banquet so much. This ceremony was also to give a satisfactory answer to their ancestors, and to give the Yinjiao tribe a meaningful commemoration. The setting sun disappeared at the end of the vast mountains, but the sound of the horn could still be heard. Inside the Flaming River Castle, the large venue was already covered in shadows. Because of this, the totem flames were so bright. That's totem. I can feel it. It's the aura of Yinjiao's fire seed. How is this possible? How is this possible? The people who insisted on staying in the venue looked on in shock. This was the first time they saw Yinjiao's special ceremony with their own eyes. A ceremony without a fire pit, without a fire seed. It was unbelievable. Yinjiao, without a fire pit, without a fire seed, had actually started a ceremony. And it was a success. Was this Yinjiao's secret? But even though they saw it with their own eyes, they still didn't understand. How did this happen? Just as everyone was puzzled, the venue changed again. The vague aura of the fire seed suddenly became clear, and it was still rising rapidly. On the walls of the venue, the remnant aura of fearsome beasts on the beast bones was completely suppressed. Even the blood that Zheng Luo and the others purposely left on the beast bones to add to the violent aura disappeared without a trace. It was still the same venue, but in the blink of an eye, everything changed. To the non-Yinjiao tribesmen, the aura of the Yinjiao fire seed gave them a bad feeling. This sudden and extremely dangerous aura of a foreign tribe's fire seed was not targeted at them, but it filled the entire venue. No, not just the venue, but outside the Flaming River Castle, inside the Flaming River trading point, this aura was everywhere. This made their hair stand on end, and they felt like their hair was about to explode. It was as if there was a cold electric current running through their bodies, causing many people to shiver. Abuli, who was hiding in front of the Beast Fong door, was peeking inside. The moment the Flaming Horn fire seed's aura intensified, the totemic patterns on his body also appeared. Fingernails as long as his fingers suddenly popped out of his fingers. On his large feet, fingernails as long as his toes also grew out with a whoosh. They were as long as his toes. The fine hair on his face grew longer and thicker. Abuli arched his back, spread his legs apart, and put his arms in front and back. It was a strange pose. This was not what he wanted to do. It was a reflex. He did not look like he was going to fight. He was prepared to run away at any time. It was not just Abuli. The other tribesmen also had similar changes. Under the stimulation of the foreign fire seed's aura, they could only use their own totem power to resist. In an instant, all kinds of totem patterns, all kinds of specializations, and all kinds of external changes caused by the totem power appeared. It was completely different from before. Unlike these people, the Yinjiao tribesmen felt very good. Their blood was boiling, their emotions were aroused, and their hearts were filled with endless emotions that almost rushed out of their chests. However, no one made a sound. What replaced it was the sudden appearance of the totem patterns in their bodies, followed by the emergence of the flames. The flames gradually increased in number and covered a wider area, almost enveloping everyone's entire body. If it was said that Yinjiao's success in summoning their totems had shocked the crowd, now, they were so shocked that their worldview was shattered. It's really burning, someone muttered as he looked over there in a daze. Without a fire pit, without a fire seed, without people, how could they perform a ritual? But now Yinjiao had succeeded. Beast hides, beast meat, spices, and grains were all fucking secondary. To them, Yinjiao's most important move was this ritual at the end of the Flaming River Grand Banquet. At this moment, some of the people present seemed to have a vague guess. Although this guess had surfaced when Yinjiao's fire seed had just disappeared, they did not dwell on it. After that, they even felt like they were watching a show. But now this guess made them uneasy. What would the final form of the fire seed look like? Perhaps Yinjiao's purpose in inviting them was not just to promote the Flaming River trading point and show off. There were other reasons. Blood and fire from the same source. The chief of the Mang tribe couldn't help but think of this phrase. This was also a hypothesis that the Mang shaman came up with when he was analyzing Yinjiao's fire seed. Outside the Beast Fang Gate, Abuli looked at the burning Yinjiao tribesmen, then turned to look at the Yinjiao tribesmen outside the Flaming River Castle. They were all burning. Wait, that. Look at that person. He's burning. Abuli's wife cried out in shock. Nonsense. I know he's burning. All the Yinjiao tribesmen are burning. Abuli snapped out of his daze and finally closed his sore jaw. Not those, look. Abuli's wife reached out and grabbed Abuli's face with both hands, then pulled him towards the Flaming River Castle. With one look, Abuli's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. His closed jaw dropped just like that. Ugh! Abuli slowly raised his head and looked into the sky. Finally, he raised his head and looked into the sky. He squeezed out 2 words, ancestor. Chapter 625. Inside the Flaming River Castle. In the open space in front of the Flaming River Tower, there were 3 people facing the totemic flames on the wall. One of them had flames that were clearly different from the others. The flames on the Yinjiao people present varied in strength and height, but there wasn't much of a difference. However, Xiao Xian, who was originally standing with the current chief and shaman of Yinjiao, suddenly had flames rising from his body. This gave everyone a fright. The people who were still shocked by the flames on the Yinjiao people shifted their attention to Xiao Xian because of this change. The sudden rise of the flames was almost as tall as the Flaming River Tower. It continued to rise until it reached a height that everyone in the vicinity could only look up at. This was why Abuli was looking up instead of at eye level. What he saw was the flames on Xiao Xian's body rising. After the soaring pillar of flames stopped rising, it began to spread out in all directions. The pillar of flames grew thicker, and there were even more flames floating out from it. Seeing this change, the Yinjiao people were only shocked for a moment before they calmed down. There was even a hint of joy in their eyes. This was why Xiao Xian was able to firmly occupy the position of Grand Elder and monopolize all 6 bone ornaments that only elders had the right to wear. No one complained because of this. Not everyone could wear these bone ornaments. The 6 bone ornaments represented the will of their ancestors. As for this flame giant, it would only appear when Xiao Xian wore it. One of the reasons they held this ceremony after the banquet was to give an explanation to their deceased ancestors. Now the bone ornaments had a reaction. Although the flames weren't as solid as before, everyone could see that this was the flame giant. The flame giant that represented the first generation of ancestors. The will of their ancestors had appeared. This made the Yinjiao people present extremely excited. While their eyes filled with tears, they also calmed down. Their mood at the moment was like a very hard-working student who had done his best to hand in an answer sheet. Then, a teacher who they had been looking forward to and worshipping finally appeared and gave them a good review. It would be strange if they were not happy. The 6 bone ornaments left behind by the first shaman of Yinjiao had helped them a lot. Without the 6 bone ornaments and the power of their ancestors, Yinjiao would not have been able to merge so quickly and smoothly. Whether it was the shock of being chased by the slave masters on the other side of the sea, or the return of breaking through the sea, he had borrowed the power of the ancestral bone ornaments. However, after the bone ornament broke through the sea, it seemed to have exhausted its energy and entered a dormant state. There were very few large fluctuations. When they were planning this sacrifice, they didn't expect the bone ornaments to suddenly work. This was a pleasant surprise. Perhaps it was because the power of the bone ornaments had not fully recovered, but the flames that gradually formed after it was raised seemed a little scattered. It was not solid enough, and the human figure was not clear enough. Even so, the Yinjiao people were very satisfied. They wanted nothing more than to kneel down and kowtow a few times. Outside the Flaming River trading point in the forest, The tribesmen who came to attend the feast all left some people outside to wait. These people had to keep an eye on the flaming river trading point and guard against any suspicious situations outside the trading point. Other than them, there were also some people who were not invited. They came because they were curious, so they hid in the forest. At that time, when the feast in the trading area started, the aroma of the food floated out, causing the people hiding in the forest to salivate. Their stomachs couldn't help but growl. They could only drink some water with the smell of soil and chew on the hard jerky. The sudden burst of flames in the trading area naturally attracted their attention. Flaming river trading point, is on fire? What happened? Someone cried out in shock. Just now, they felt a very uncomfortable aura coming from the flaming river trading point. They understood this. After all, this was Yinjiao's territory. It was normal to feel this way in someone else's territory. They didn't feel this way before, and they were not used to it. But what was going on with this ferocious fire? Could it be the Yinjiao tribesman finally made a move? The person who spoke used his hand as a knife and made a chopping motion. It can't be. Would the Yinjiao people be so stupid? Also, those few tribes that went in, forget about those small tribes. Would people like the Mang tribe, the Thousand Masks tribe, and the Eight Limbs tribe be killed without a sound? The Hui tribe and Tian Shan tribe's eagles are still around, but they didn't come close. There were indeed eagles from the Hui tribe and Tian Shan tribe nearby, but they weren't hovering in the air right now. Instead, they were resting on trees or protruding rocks further away from the flaming river trading point, observing the movements of the flaming river trading point. They didn't hear the whistle that signaled an incident. None of the tribesmen who went in blew the whistle. Let's wait and see. The people hiding in the forest stared nervously at the trading point. Their nerves were taut, and they were ready to rush over at any moment. At the same time, the people who saw this scene in the flaming river trading point were also shocked. Especially those in the flaming river castle, who were observing closely. Their emotions were extremely complicated. If the aura of the fire seed in Yinjiao was shocking enough, and then the spontaneous combustion of the Yinjiao tribesmen was shocking enough. Now, the change in Xiaoxian's body was like a pot of oil being poured into a burning fire. It sizzled and burned everyone's nerves. They couldn't understand it, couldn't imagine it. This was a completely different world from what they used to know. All the views they had in the past had to be changed. Blood and fire of the same origin. This was the only reason why the Yinjiao tribesmen could cause such a commotion, even though they didn't have a fire seed. Even if it was just a guess, they still couldn't calm down when they saw it for themselves. As for what they were seeing now, it was no longer something that could be explained by blood and fire of the same origin. This was probably a unique ability of the Yinjiao tribe, a power passed down by Yinjiao's ancestors. Outsiders couldn't obtain it. They could only continue watching from the side. They wanted to see what Yinjiao's Grand Elder was up to. At this moment, Xiaoxian also didn't expect the dormant bone ornaments to suddenly become active. The totemic power, the power of inheritance, and that special power in his body were rapidly being drawn out. The 6 bone ornaments hanging in front of his chest spun wildly like a whirlpool, sucking in Xiaoxian's power. This was different from the previous few times. In the past, these 6 bone ornaments either appeared on their own without Xiaoxian providing too much power. The timing of their appearance wasn't chosen by Xiaoxian either. Or, Xiaoxian used his own power to activate the bone ornaments. Just like when the bone ornaments couldn't hold on anymore after breaking through the sea, Xiaoxian used his own power to support them. But now, the bone ornaments' power hadn't been activated by Xiaoxian. It could be said that they had appeared on their own. They just needed Xiaoxian's power to support them. The bone ornaments hadn't recovered. Xiaoxian thought of the reason. Perhaps the remnant left in the bone ornaments by the ancestor was too happy at this momentous banquet. So it had popped out on its own? Perhaps it was because of the ancestor's will. But Xiaoxian's emotions were affected by the sudden surge of power from the bone ornaments. It was as if he wanted to howl at the top of his lungs. Sure enough, the ancestor must be very happy. Xiaoxian moved under the influence of this emotion. The Yinjiao people. Their gazes moved from the tall flame giant to Xiaoxian. Their gazes went from boundless reverence to astonishment, and then to shock. Wait, Grand Elder, what are you doing? Don't raise your foot. Show mercy. We're still standing by your side, Grand Elder. Look at us. Please don't step on us. Please don't step on us. The Yinjiao people present, whether they'd seen Xiao Xian use the ancestors' power with their own eyes, or heard about it later, all thought the same thing when they saw Xiao Xian's sudden movement. All the Flaming Horn tribesmen, including the current chief and shamaness, as well as Duo Kong and the other leaders, turned pale with fright when they saw this. It was just that their faces were covered by the flames, so it wasn't obvious. If Xiao Xian raised his foot and stomped down, all the effort they put into this banquet would go to waste. Not only would they not be able to show off the Yinjiao tribe's strength, they'd be laughed at. If they were kicked at such a close distance, even if they didn't die, they'd be seriously injured. Especially Zheng Luo, Duo Kong, and the others who'd seen the flame giant's power with their own eyes. Their hands were shaking. Years ago, when they'd migrated from their habitat by the sea, they'd met the slave masters who'd chased after them. They'd seen Xiao Xian use the ancestors' bone ornament's power to stomp on the ground. Then, the ground had cracked like an earthquake. It had also temporarily intimidated the pursuers, stopping them from continuing to chase after them. He could crack the ground, fight against a king beast, and break through the sea. Could they withstand this kind of power? They thought about how the ground had cracked when he stomped on it, and how large chunks of rock had been flipped over. Then, they thought about what would happen if they replicated that scene here. They thought about the time they'd met the king beast at the salt mines. They hadn't even seen how Xiao Xian used the ancestors' bone ornament's power, before they were all sent flying and buried in the snow. Every one of them was trembling in fear. The more they thought about it, the more scared they became. Zheng Luo and the others paled even further. Grand Elder, please don't do this. But from the looks of it, Xiao Xian didn't seem like he wanted to do this on purpose. Maybe it was the ancestors' idea? They really wanted to stop Xiao Xian from doing what he was about to do. But due to their reverence for their ancestor, they didn't dare act rashly. As they hesitated, Xiao Xian moved again. This time, Xiao Xian didn't move his feet. Instead, he moved his hands. Xiao Xian raised his arms casually. The blurry flame giant in the air also seemed to raise its arms. Seeing this, the Yinjiao people breathed a sigh of relief. It was good that Xiao Xian didn't raise his feet. They were so scared that cold sweat broke out on their foreheads. In the past, during sacrifices, the flame giant representing their ancestor had also raised its arms as if cheering. That was why they could finally relax. So the ancestor wanted to cheer. We were so scared. Wait. Chapter 626. The flame giant was blurry and difficult to identify. Instead of trying to figure out what the flame giant was going to do, it was better to look at Xiao Xian. After all, Xiao Xian was the representative of the ancestral flame giant. The flame giant's movements were always synchronized with Xiao Xian's. That was why the Yinjiao people couldn't tell what the flame giant was going to do next, so they all stared at Xiao Xian. This was a very strange scene. Even the atmosphere in the hall changed. The other tribes also noticed that something was wrong with the Yinjiao people. They felt that the Yinjiao people's expressions were very strange. Although they couldn't see all the Yinjiao people's expressions clearly from their angle, they could still see a little from the side. Because of this, they couldn't understand what the Yinjiao people were thinking. An inexplicable tension filled the hall. The people who stared at the Yinjiao people, or the flame giant in the sky, were all tensed up. The totemic power in their bodies was already at its peak, ready for anything that might happen. Could it be that when Gui he advised everyone to leave, and, I don't recommend anyone to stay here, there was really something dangerous going on? If Gigu knew what they were thinking, he would definitely cry foul. Because even he, the current chief of Yinjiao, didn't expect something like this to happen. Plus, the Yinjiao people were even more nervous than the spectators. At this moment, Abuli, who was hiding in front of the Flaming River Castle's Beast Fang Gate, had a bad feeling about this. He was also nervous. At the same time, they were more cautious than the other tribes. To put it bluntly, they were already cowards. When they were hunting for food in the forest, the slightest movement would make them run for their lives. Although their tribe wasn't big enough and didn't have the strength to compete with other tribes for resources, they were able to survive in the forest until now with their caution, intuition, and ability to escape. Since they felt that something uncomfortable was going to happen, they didn't hesitate anymore. Curiosity wasn't as important as their lives. Abuli reached out and scooped his wife up before running away while shouting, "Hide!" The other drumming tribesmen had been waiting for this moment. When they heard Abuli's words, they quickly ran after him. Outside the flaming river castle, there were many houses that looked like courtyards. When Xiao Xian was designing this place, he designed it to look like a courtyard house. After Abuli ran away from the Beast Fang gate, he jumped into the house through the window. No one from the other tribes had been arranged to stay in this courtyard, and the Yinjiao people who were originally inside had already left the house, so there was no one else in the house. It was because of this that Abuli chose to hide in the house in the courtyard. The door of the house was closed, but two of the windows were open. Looking at the empty house, there was nothing inside. The person at the end of the line reached out with his long hand and hooked the wooden window with his fingernails. Then he pressed the window panel tightly. However, there was also a warrior from the drumming tribe who got stuck when he jumped through the window. It wasn't because he was too fat, but because he brought too much food with him. It was the leftover food from the banquet. There was too much food, and the window was too small. He couldn't drag the food into the house. After weighing the pros and cons, he reluctantly put down the food and closed the window. In the blink of an eye, Abuli led almost 100 people to hide in the biggest house in the courtyard. Even though this was the largest room in the courtyard, it was still a little crowded with nearly 100 people who had eaten and drank to their fill. The doors and windows were tightly shut, and the house instantly darkened. Only the cracks in the windows and the gaps between the roof tiles could be seen. The darkness made them nervous. Puff, there was a long and soft sound. Abuli smelled the smell in the air, and his face turned green. "Who farted?" "Sorry. I ate too much and couldn't control myself," said an apologetic voice not far from Abuli. But at this time, they couldn't open the window and go out. They could only endure it. At the same time, in the flaming river castle, there was a huge commotion almost as soon as Abuli and the others hid in the house. Xiao Xian raised his arms, but it wasn't like his usual cheering posture. After he raised his arms, he opened them to both sides. Then, like a person standing in the wind, he shook his sleeves. At the same time, the flame giant opened its arms and shook them like Xiao Xian. In the next moment, it was as if a strong gust of wind blew past, elongating the flames on the flame giant's body. Long, wide sleeves seemed to have been pulled out from its arms. Its body also looked like it was wearing a long robe that was blown up by this gust of wind. However, this was just the beginning. The sleeves were pulled out again, and the flame giant's entire body seemed to have been elongated. It was like a torch that was blown by the wind, leaving a long tail of flames behind. However, unlike the torch that was blown by the wind, the flame giant's body was still there. It didn't become lighter or shorter. On the contrary, countless flames gushed out from its body, turning into a long stream of flames that flowed into the distance. The flame giant was already taller than any of the buildings in the flaming river trading point. The flames that gushed out from it easily passed through the buildings in the flaming river castle. The unstoppable stream of flames instantly rushed out of the flaming river castle and into the flaming river trading point. It spread everywhere like a waterfall, as if it wanted to wash away everything in the flaming river trading point. However, the strange thing was that the stream of flames easily bypassed the Yinjiao tribesmen. Gigu and Guizhe, who were standing beside Xiao Xian, could clearly feel the stream of flames that brushed past them. It seemed like a raging stream of flames, but they couldn't feel any wind at all. It wasn't just them. In the trading point, all the buildings and all the tools were still in their original positions. They weren't damaged, they weren't broken. It was as if nothing had happened. However, the foreign tribesmen who stayed in the flaming river trading point suffered. Especially those who were the closest to the flaming river castle. They felt it the most. At this moment, They felt like they were in the middle of a storm, desperately trying to withstand the waves. The aura of the E-tribe's fire seed was even stronger. This made them feel very uncomfortable. It was like a person who likes salty food, but didn't like sweet food being poured sugar all over his body. What's more, it was a mountain of sugar on top of him. How could they feel good about this? Everyone gritted their teeth and endured it. They were the ones who chose to stay, and they even chose to stay so close to the flaming river. They brought this upon themselves, so they had to endure it even if it meant death. In comparison, the Ji tribesmen who were already in hiding were much better off. They were some distance away from the flaming river castle, and they were still hiding in their houses. The stream of flames didn't collide with them directly. However, the sudden pressure from the house made many people's teeth chatter. They could clearly hear the sound of trembling teeth in the house. Abulima's lips trembled as he tried to control his chattering teeth. He was going crazy. What was going on? What did Yanjiao do? My legs have turned to jelly from fright. Chapter 627. In just a few seconds, the entire flaming river trading point was engulfed in flames. The buildings in the trading point were blurred by the flames. All the foreign tribesmen who remained in the flaming river trading point felt the same fear. The sudden pressure made them tremble in fear. Unfortunately, their leaders were still inside the flaming river castle, so they couldn't find their leader. They didn't know what to do, so they could only squeeze together with their companions, like little chicks huddling together in the wind for warmth. They gritted their teeth and endured the pressure. They were worried that something had happened in the flaming river castle. They were worried about the safety of their leaders, but they didn't hear any whistles. Without any whistles, they didn't dare to act recklessly. This was something their leaders had emphasized many times before they came. They couldn't act recklessly, now that something unexpected had happened. If the other tribesmen had whistled for help, they would have rushed over, because their own leaders might have gotten into an accident and couldn't blow the whistle. But now, none of the big tribes that had come over had blown the whistle yet. Outside the flaming river trading point, the people who had been staring at the trading point were also shocked to see the trading point bathed in flames. If they hadn't sensed that it wasn't an ordinary flame, but a flame similar to a fire seed that wouldn't burn people or things, they would have rushed over. What's going on over there? Someone was going crazy. Even if the flames weren't normal and wouldn't burn people or things, the rejection of the foreign fire seeds still made them very uncomfortable. It wasn't there before, so why did it suddenly appear now? What should we do? Should we go over and take a look? Wait. Keep waiting. Another person squeezed out a few words from between his teeth. Without any whistles, it was impossible for all the leaders to die. Even if they didn't believe in anything else, they still had confidence in their own leaders. How could their leaders be so useless? Wait. They could only wait. Wait for the whistle to sound or wait for the other side to calm down. After about half an hour, the flames in the trading point gradually dimmed and disappeared. Inside the flaming river castle, the giant flame giant also slowly faded until it disappeared. The aura of the Yinjiao fire seed that filled the area also disappeared. This made all the foreign tribesmen in the trading point finally breathe a sigh of relief. Was it finally over? They weren't sure. They were scared stiff. Who knew if there was anything else after that? Hence, after the flames in the flaming river trading point disappeared, a portion of the people standing on the road were flaming horn tribesmen. They were refreshed and full of energy. Their eyes were still filled with excitement, as if they were believers who had just bathed in the holy light. This was the complete opposite of the other tribesmen, who looked tense and nervous. The drumming tribesmen who were hiding in their houses also opened their windows a little to see what was happening outside. They were timid and cautious, so they would only come out after making sure there were no more threats. The people who were left outside the flaming river castle all hurried towards the Beast Fong gate. They wanted to make sure that their chief was safe. When they saw the people coming out, they let out a long sigh of relief. Although the expressions of the leaders were not very good, they did not see any injuries. That was enough. The people who found their backbone did not worry anymore. They just waited for their chief's orders. The Yinjiao people were inside wrapping up the ceremony, But the few tribesmen who were watching were not in the mood to stay any longer. They came out with pale faces and called for the people waiting outside the Beast Fong gate to return to the courtyards that Yinjiao had arranged for them. The Mang tribesmen returned to their courtyards. After their subordinates reported, Chief Fu Gui waved his hand and asked everyone to leave, leaving only Huang Yi behind. Did you feel it before? Fu Gui asked. Huang Yi was stunned. He didn't understand what his chief was talking about. According to the people who came to report, no matter if it was the Yinjiao tribesmen in the trading point or the Yinjiao tribesmen outside, they all had the same changes, Fu Gui said. You mean? Huang Yi made a fiery gesture with his hand. Fu Gui nodded. It's not just them. I heard from the people who were watching over Yinjiao that the people there also had the same changes. Huang Yi's eyes widened. It's so far away. And there's even a river between us. How is that possible? That's what I'm concerned about too. Fu Gui looked thoughtful. He was indeed getting more and more interested in the other form of the fire seed. No matter what, we have to change our original plan. I plan to stay here for a while, Fu Gui said. Initially, they just wanted to take a look at the Flaming River trading point and see what the Flaming Horn tribe was really like. They wanted to know if they could really hold a grand banquet like this. In their plan, they didn't plan to stay here for too long. After all, they weren't familiar with the Flaming River region, and there weren't many expedition teams here. This had always been a remote and poor place on the mainland. They didn't want to stay here for too long. But now Fu Gui changed his mind. He didn't care about the food at the start of the Flaming River Grand Banquet. Now he only cared about two things. First, the green weapons in the Yinjiao tribesmen's hands. Second, and most importantly, the thing he cared about the most, the other form of the fire seed. Fu Gui had a feeling that if he didn't figure this out, he would definitely regret it. Maybe our tribe will make the same choice as Yinjiao. Fu Gui sighed. Huang Yi understood what Fu Gui meant by the same choice. He couldn't help but worry. But the fire seed concerns the entire tribe. We should think more about it. Of course. But I have a feeling that we'll still choose the same path as Yinjiao. Fu Gui was disappointed. Seeing that Huang Yi still didn't agree, he said, Why do you think Yinjiao revealed this secret? They kept it in for so long, and didn't even say anything in the fearsome beast forest. Why did they half reveal it now? Yinjiao wants to show off? Or they want to use this matter to squeeze more things out of our hands? Huang Yi answered tentatively. Fu Gui smiled helplessly. Neither. As he spoke, he raised his hand and pointed in a direction. That was the direction of the desert. Rock Hill City? Huang Yi asked. More than that. The expression on Fu Gui's face was very strange. It was something that Huang Yi had never seen before. It seemed like he was looking forward to it, but also a little uneasy. But more than that, he was looking forward to it. On the other side of the sea, different from some tribes where strength was the most important thing, where the strongest was the leader, every generation of leaders of the Mang tribe was carefully selected. Their strength may not be the strongest in the tribe, and they may not even be in the top 3. However, they must be smart and farsighted. No one knew when the Mang tribe began to implement such a selection method. If Xiaoxian knew this, he would definitely sigh. No wonder they were one of the strongest tribes in the central region. Not every tribe could have such awareness. No wonder the Mang tribe had been able to develop steadily. Although the leaders of the Mang tribe might not be able to do everything perfectly, and their thinking was still very limited, sometimes it had to be said that their leaders, whether it was the Mang tribe's chief or the shaman, had a very sharp sense. Before Huang Yi could understand what the words on the other side of the sea meant, Fu Gui said again, After this, the tribes around the Flaming River will definitely lean towards Yinjiao. Not to mention other tribes. Just the tribes that came this time will definitely lean towards Yinjiao. Huang Yi agreed with Fu Gui's words. Perhaps other people would find it unbelievable that the Flaming Horn tribe was able to lure so many people over with just one meal. However, as someone who had held banquets before, they knew very well that the poorer the tribe, the easier it was for them to be lured over with just one meal. This was the reason why many powerful tribes would choose to hold a banquet instead of a direct battle. How easy was it to achieve their goal with just one meal? However, those small tribes weren't stupid. They could tell if they were truly powerful or not. Yinjiao's banquet made them feel very satisfied, especially after today's fire. Although they were afraid at the time, their desire to lean towards Yinjiao only grew stronger. The stronger Yinjiao was, the more they would feel at ease. Many tribesmen didn't think too much. They only recognized what they had seen and experienced. It was impossible to persuade them to break away from Yinjiao in a short period of time. This was the strange thing about many tribesmen. Sometimes they could be so stupid that it made people feel helpless. If Yinjiao can gather all the tribes in this area, they will be a powerful force. Huang Yi understood this point. You and I both know Yinjiao's strength. They might not be weaker than us. If they gather all these tribes, they won't have to fear any other tribes. But they still chose to reveal the secret of the fire seed. Because they are afraid. Fu Gui looked at Huang Yi. Where do you think those Yinjiao people who came out of the desert came from? Of course they came from the desert. Huang Yi's voice suddenly stopped, and his eyes were full of shock. You mean on the other side of the sea? Fu Gui didn't speak, but his expression gave Huang Yi an affirmative answer. Fu Gui's guess was right. The Yinjiao tribes decided to reveal this secret after many discussions. They had thought of hiding it from everyone, and only telling the tribes they were on good terms with, or using this secret to squeeze more benefits from other tribes. However, in the end, they chose this method. The two continents were already very close. It was only a matter of time before the trade and conflicts broke out. At that time, it would be very difficult for Yinjiao alone. Now there were still too few Yinjiao tribes, and they couldn't even compare with an ordinary city on the other side. On the other side of the sea, the noble families of the 6 tribes were united. The nobles of each city had some tribes under their control. The tribes on the other side were different from the tribes on this side. They wouldn't abandon the nobles and support the people on this side. As for the tribes on this side, according to Xiao Xian's understanding of them, although they had many conflicts in the past, when it came to the slave masters, they would definitely stand on the same side. Even the Longboat tribe and Tianshan tribe who didn't like Yinjiao would still choose Yinjiao if they had to choose between Yinjiao and the slave masters. That night, the people of the few major tribes who stayed in the Flaming River trading point couldn't sleep well. They all had their own guesses, and they were very close to the truth. The matter of the fire seed made them feel irritated. The original fire seed was gone, but the fire seed was still there. It was just that it existed in a situation where blood and fire came from the same source. Yinjiao had already proven this to them. Innovation was always accompanied by fear. Choosing this meant giving up something they were already used to. This was a huge challenge for the tribesmen. They were worried and hesitant. They weren't sure if this kind of innovation was good or bad for their tribe. It might be suitable for other tribes, but it might not be suitable for them. The original fire seed protected the entire tribe, but it also trapped them. There were many restrictions on what they could do. However, if one day the fire seed wasn't limited to one place, if the tribesmen didn't have to gather in one place all year round, what would the future be like with this freedom? Yinjiao chose this path of innovation. The drumming tribe and rain tribe followed in Yinjiao's footsteps. Then, who would be the next to make the same choice? Chapter 628. After the Flaming River Grand Banquet ended, the Flaming River Trading Point was officially opened. Large stone tablets were erected at the entrances of the trading point. The rules of the trading point were engraved on them. Every new face that entered the trading point would be reminded by the flaming horn guards to read the rules. Otherwise, they wouldn't even know why they were killed in the trading point. Once their lives were at stake, those who didn't care immediately retreated to take a closer look. Many of these new faces had followed the other tribes to the banquet. Previously, they couldn't enter. But now that they heard that the Flaming River Trading Point was finally open, they finally mustered up the courage to enter after a night of contemplation. Those who were used to traveling long distances all had an adventurous mentality and were full of curiosity. Otherwise, they wouldn't have persisted for so long. When they were observing the Flaming River Trading Point from afar, they were so curious that they wanted to reach out and scratch it, but they couldn't reach it. Now they could finally see everything in the Flaming River trading point with their own eyes. Of the 24 tribes who came to the banquet yesterday, none of them left. Some of them had already planned to trade here and return later, while others were waiting for the best time to leave. For example, the drumming tribe didn't leave yesterday because they ate too much and couldn't run. Plus, there were all kinds of dangers outside. Now that a night had passed, they had already digested most of their food. They had already finished all the food they brought from the Flaming River Castle. Now, they were just waiting for the people outside to come in so they could escape. If they left early, they might be blocked by the people outside with bad intentions. The safest way was to wait for those curious people to come in before they left. There were a few other smaller tribes who had the same idea. They weren't good at other things, but they were very good at predicting the best time to escape. The people who entered the Flaming River trading point were attracted by all kinds of fierce things. Oh look at such a big piece of meat. I've never eaten it before. Could that be fearsome beast meat? Fearsome beast meat. These 3 words were undeniably shocking. Even those who traveled long distances rarely saw fearsome beasts, unless they went to the fearsome beast forest or the desert. But how many people had the guts to enter the fearsome beast forest? Even the Wuxia tribe in those days didn't dare to go in often. As long as they were not stupid, they would definitely stay far away from that dangerous place. As for the desert, even fewer people went there. What kind of meat is this? Someone asked with wide eyes. As he spoke, he leaned closer to sniff the bloody meat, and an intoxicated look appeared on his face. It must be delicious. Giant bear. The Yinjiao man in charge of the stall said slowly. Giant bear? How big is this huge? Someone was puzzled. What kind of meat is this? Without waiting for the meat seller to answer, another person impatiently pointed to the other side and asked. That's the meat of the giant claw beast. The man in charge of the stall continued to answer slowly. Giant claw. How big is a claw? Here, just like that. The man who was selling beast meat pointed at the stall next door that was selling beast fangs and beast claws. The third one from here is the giant claw of the giant claw beast. Oh, a group of people rushed over. This is the giant claw of the giant claw beast? Yes. The uncle who was selling beast fangs and beast claws smiled with his white teeth. He seemed to casually move the giant claw over to let this group of people who hadn't seen the world take a closer look. The people who rushed over touched the beast's claw from top to bottom, then from bottom to top again. Their eyes shone as they stared at the giant beast's claw that was more than twice their height. Then what kind of beast's claw is this? Someone pointed to the side and asked. That's a beast tooth. Such a big beast tooth. It's alright, it's not that big. The uncle who was selling beast tooth once again showed his white teeth. Do you want to buy it? The people who were excited just a moment ago immediately looked as if they had been hit by frost. Their expressions were as if they had been frozen, and they were dumbfounded. They had come in too much of a hurry. In order to make it easier to follow them, they hadn't brought enough money. In their pockets, there were only a few glowing crystals and shells. The jade stones were also lonely and of poor quality. There really weren't many things that could be used as currency. At first, they wanted to trick the Yinjiao people. But on second thought, if the Yinjiao people could hold a banquet to show off their wealth, how could they not have seen these before? Then, they recalled what they had seen since entering the Flaming River trading point. They really didn't have the courage to trick the Yinjiao people. They thought about the rules written on the stone tablet when they entered the Flaming River trading point. Then they thought about how the uncle who was selling beast teeth and beast claws so casually moved the giant claw over. They would be killed, okay? But if they didn't bring anything back to show off, they would be letting themselves down. Go out and rob? Some people looked around fiercely, searching for the people from the smaller tribes. They heard that some of the tribes who came to the banquet were just small tribes that couldn't even fill their stomachs. If they didn't rob, were they going to rob the bigger tribes? Even idiots wouldn't do that. But when they started searching, the Ji tribe had already found a chance to escape. It would be difficult to catch up now. Some people didn't want to give up, so they gathered their companions and left the Flaming River trading point. Because of the rules, they didn't dare to do anything inside. so they could only go out and search. While these people were searching, the chiefs of the Mang tribe, Eight Limbs tribe, Long Boat, Thousand Mask, Feather Tian Shan, Hui and the other big tribes entered the Flaming River Castle again. But this time, they weren't in the open air. Instead, they were led to a special meeting room inside the castle. Only a few chiefs went in. On the Yinjiao side, only Gigu and Xiao Xian were there. Xiao Xian stretched. He had been busy the whole day yesterday, and he still had to finish up at night, so he didn't sleep much. His ancestor's flame giant had consumed a lot of his energy, so he was sleepy now. When Xiao Xian stretched his arms, everyone in the meeting room looked at Xiao Xian in unison. Sensing their stares, Xiao Xian said, "Don't be nervous, I'm just stretching." Those people didn't care. Only when Xiao Xian finished stretching and yawning did they look away expressionlessly. They couldn't help it. They were shocked by what happened yesterday. They didn't know what the flame giant was, but they knew that it was definitely Xiao Xian's doing. He just waved his sleeves and spat out fire in the trading point. Now they were all traumatized. When they saw Xiao Xian stretch his arms, they couldn't help but feel nervous. Gigu knew this feeling very well, but he knew that the ancestor's flame giant rarely came out during non-ritual times. So when he saw everyone's reaction, he wanted to laugh, but he couldn't. Yesterday, when the ancestor's flame giant came out, he was standing beside Xiao Xian. At that time, he was so scared that his back was covered in cold sweat. After calming himself down, Gigu looked at Xiao Xian. When he saw Xiao Xian nod, he said, "Let's begin." The stone door of the meeting room closed with a bang, blocking out the sound from inside. When night fell, the stone door opened again. The chiefs had complicated expressions on their faces. They couldn't tell if they were happy or angry. On the 5th day of the Flaming River Trading Point's opening, they left with their people. The curious travelers who came with them also left one after another. With their publicity, the Flaming River Trading Point's name quickly spread across the mainland. To the tribesmen on this mainland, which tribe destroyed which tribe was at most a short discussion. Most tribesmen only talked about tribes that were far away from their own tribe, or were not familiar with them. If there was anything new, they would immediately shift their attention to it. However, when it came to food, they could talk about it for a long time. Some of them were even counting with their fingers the number of tribes that had held banquets in the past few years. This was especially true for the travelers from the various trading points. When they were free, they would gather together to discuss. I wonder what Yinjiao ate at the banquet. Anyway, I heard that a few big tribes praised it. That means the Flaming River Trading Point is very powerful. It's not the Flaming River Trading Point that's powerful. It's the Yinjiao tribes that are powerful. It's all the same. Did you guys go with them? No, we know a tribe. Someone went with them. Those rumors are all true? This huge beast tooth, this huge beast claw, are they all real? Someone stood up and gestured. Hey, it's not that small. It's much bigger than what you said. Too bad they didn't bring enough things back and couldn't buy a huge beast claw. That kind of beast claw. TSK. You don't need to polish it. You can use it as a weapon. I heard that it can cut through stone in an instant. It was rare for that person to receive so much attention, so he felt proud. He cleared his throat and continued to tell everyone what he had heard. Gradually, more and more people gathered around. Every now and then, they would gasp or exclaim in unison, "Ah, ha, yeah," or "Oh, hey." Those who went with them didn't have anything to buy the beast's claw. Didn't they rob them? Someone asked. You dare to rob Yinjiao? The crowd looked at the person who asked the question, as if they were looking at an idiot. In their hearts, Yinjiao was already on a whole new level. They were not inferior to the big tribes in the central region. Pfft. When did I say that I wanted to rob Yinjiao? Am I that stupid? The person who asked the question explained. I said to rob those small tribes. No, the tribes in the Flaming River area are familiar with the terrain there. I heard that those who wanted to rob them lost them after a while. The person in the middle immediately picked up the topic and started to blabber on and on. Why don't we go on an excursion there after a while? The leader of one of the tribes who had been listening intently said. I was thinking the same thing. Let's go together. The leader of another excursion team said. Haha, gather more people. Those small tribes aren't easy to rob, they're all very smart. The person who was telling the story only repeated what the person who told him before said. When that person was telling the story, he had to clench his teeth when he said the words very smart. That person said that every time they chased someone in the forest, they almost caught up with them. But those people always managed to escape. When they chased them, they almost fell into a bottomless cave. That's why we should bring more people when we go to the Flaming River trading point next time. Don't fall into a deep pit, and no one will save you. We can still rob the tribes there, someone said in an experienced tone. They had a good plan, but no one knew who would lose out when the time came. Chapter 629. News of the Flaming River trading point spread across the entire continent. Regardless of whether it was the large trading points in the central region or the trading point on the grasslands, people were quietly spreading the news of the Flaming River trading point. This was arranged by the major tribes, and it was also one of the things they promised the Flaming Horns. Once the trading point became famous, more people came. At first, there were only a few people who came every 3 days, but now, there were teams coming every day. The teams that came this time all came with a purpose, so they brought a lot of things with them. They wouldn't return empty-handed. They traded for a lot of beast hides and fearsome beast meat at the Flaming River trading point. Beast fangs and claws were also selling well. Now, the Yinjiao people didn't have to store extra beast hides for long periods of time. Basically, they just had to register them at the Flaming River trading point. They didn't have to bring the goods far away. They just had to guard the Yinjiao headquarters and the trading point. When it was their turn to hunt, they would go to the forest for a walk. This saved a lot of manpower and time. This is even more convenient than when we were on the other side of the sea. Duokong had just returned from a hunt. He left some of the prey at the headquarters and dealt with the rest. He separated the beast hides and meat, separated the fangs and bones, and brought them to the trading point for the people in charge of setting up stalls to sell. The team that came 2 days ago hasn't left yet. They're waiting for this batch of beast meat. Today 2 more teams came. They said they were guarding the claws of the giant clawed beasts. Duoli swung his arms and couldn't hide his pride. Our things are so good. Those people are willing to wait here for a few days just for these things. Of course, we're Yinjiao. How can Yinjiao's things not be good? Duokong smiled until his eyes narrowed. He turned to Duoli and said, "Do you think the Taiha people would be jealous of us if they knew about our current lives?" Of course they'd be jealous. The father and son sat on the top floor of the Flaming River Castle and looked into the distance. They sighed at the same time. I wonder when we'll see them again. Suddenly, Duokong saw a small flock of birds fluttering their wings in the forest. It was still some distance away from the Flaming River trading point. There were many trees in the forest. Although they weren't big, they were dense enough. Someone else died. Duoli also saw the commotion. Do you think it's a traveling party, or someone from the Flaming River region? Duokong asked. Duoli thought for a moment. It's more likely that it's a traveling team. I think so too. Duokong patted his thigh and hummed a hunting song. He seemed very relaxed. As more and more people gathered at the Flaming River trading point, they began to keep a close eye on the nearby forest. If the people who came here didn't have any designs on the trading point, they wouldn't interfere. However, if anyone dared to have designs on the trading point, they would have no choice but to kill them. Fortunately, the traveling parties knew they couldn't win against the Yinjiao people, so they set their sights on the smaller tribes nearby. They wanted to get something from them. Unfortunately, those who could survive in the Flaming River region all had their own survival skills. Excluding the drumming tribe who moved here 1,000 years ago, and the rain tribe who just arrived, the ancestors of the tribes who lived here a long time ago had come into contact with fearsome beasts. Back then, the Flaming River didn't even exist. The ground wasn't cracked and both sides of the river were one. They were very close to the forest where the fearsome beasts lived. How could they not have their own survival skills? That was why when the Yinjiao told them there would be many strangers coming here in the future, the tribesmen who came to the banquet didn't panic. Instead, they seemed to have made up their minds. Although the drumming tribe was small and didn't have many people in their tribe, they looked poor and didn't seem to be very powerful. However, every time the drumming tribe came to the Flaming River trading point to trade for food, they could leave safely after that. There was even one time when they robbed a group of travelers who wanted to rob them. Alright, Duo Li moved closer to Duo Kong. Father, I heard the Grand Elder is planning to go on a long journey? Duo Kong raised an eyebrow. Why you want to go? You can't go. If I can go, I can come back and tell you about what happened. Duo Li was very clear about this. The Flaming River trading point hadn't been open for long. Even with Zheng Luo guarding the place, they still needed help. Zheng Luo and Ao, the two previous chiefs, one was guarding the trading point while the other was at the headquarters. Ta and Duo Kong, the two team leaders, had to take turns leading hunting parties or patrolling teams. They also had to come to the trading point from time to time, so they definitely couldn't leave with Xiao Xian. Since Duo Kong couldn't go, Duo Li was tempted. He wanted his father to talk to Xiao Xian, so he could join the traveling party. After all, the party was limited in number, and Duo Li was worried that he wouldn't be on the list. Now that the two branches had merged, the competition was getting fiercer. Even among the younger generation, there were many people stronger than him. He couldn't beat Mao, Imo or Yang Guang and his sister. Duo Kong was furious when he saw Duo Li's cowardice. He slapped him. If you want to go fight for it yourself. I don't care. The traveling party would definitely be dangerous. If he didn't have the ability, why would he want to join the party? He would be lucky if he didn't drag the party down. He might even die if he wasn't careful. Duo Li, who got slapped, grimaced. Duo Kang's reply was within his expectations. He lowered his head and sighed. Then he pulled himself together. Wasn't it just a competition of strength? He didn't believe that 200 people couldn't squeeze in. At this time, Xiao Xian, who was in Yanjiao's headquarters, had just come out of the medicine house. He had wanted to make a large telescope, but because of some small flaws, he hadn't been able to achieve his goal. So he made a polished convex lens into a magnifying glass about 2 palms wide for Guizhe to use. Although Guizhe had inherited the shaman's power, she hadn't awakened her totemic power before. Now that she had merged with the fire seed, she was still a distance away from the other strong people. For example, Xiao Xian could see the fine strands of grass on the rope, but Guizhe couldn't. Even if she tried, it would be very difficult. However, Guizhe was very talented in concocting herbs. Before she took over as the shaman, most of the herbs in the tribe were concocted by her. She had also concocted some new herbs with better effects. She had successfully concocted them into portable pills that could be stored for a long time. In this aspect, she was even better than the previous shaman. The old man was very pleased. Sometimes Guizhe would analyze every minute structure of the herbs, so it was very tiring to study herbs in the past. Xiao Xian's magnifying glass perfectly solved this problem. Xiao Xian was about to go on a long journey, and Guizhe had given him a lot of herbs. Although it was one of the shaman's duties to make medicine for a long journey, she was familiar with Xiao Xian, and Xiao Xian had helped her. She also gave Xiao Xian 3 fine-mouthed ceramic bottles with a total of 500 pills. This was the result of her nearly 20 days of work. These pills were for detoxification, especially snake venom. At this time of the year, the temperature was getting higher and higher, and there were more poisonous insects, snakes, and ants in the forest. It's new, so it must have a detoxification effect. I just don't know how effective it is. Guizhe couldn't be sure because she hadn't really tried it. She had eaten it before and knew it could detoxify poison, but she didn't know how strong it was. Okay, I'll test it out and tell you when I come back. Xiao Xian carefully put the 3 bottles into his animal skin bag, then went down the mountain to check on the farm. The 1,000-grain gold's planting was going well. The fertilizer was already prepared. According to Jiju's suggestion, they rotted the meat and added the bones. They specially picked the bones of the beasts that like to eat grass, sprouts and moss. Some of the bones were taken out of the bones and added in the bone marrow. Together with the experience of Chi and the rest who had taken care of the farm, the survival rate of the 1,000-grain gold was very high. However, the next step was the most important. Jiju once said that every tribulation of the 1,000 grain gold was very important. As long as they passed the first tribulation, they would reach the peak of their growth. The plants in the field had already passed the first tribulation. Every plant was already taller than Xiao Xian's waist. At this rate, they would soon face the second tribulation and grow even faster. Xiao Xian planned to guard the 1,000 grain gold until it passed the second tribulation, before bringing the team on a long journey. If they were fast, they might be able to come back during the third tribulation and see the grains. Looking at the green patch, Xiao Xian thought that even if only 1/10 of them survived, it would be enough to make him happy. Xiao Xian planned to travel further down the flaming river to see what was further downstream. They would live here for a longer time. In the past, they didn't have the means to travel further, but now, they had to take a closer look to have an idea. There weren't many tribes in the upper reaches of the flaming river. This was the situation on the other side of the river. They chose to travel further down because they knew that there were more tribes in the lower reaches of the flaming river. Looking at the large blank space on the animal skin roll, Xiao Xian closed it. They didn't plan to travel too far. They just wanted to take a look at the situation in the lower reaches of the flaming river, within a certain distance. This way, they wouldn't be caught unaware if they were ambushed. Chapter 630. After taking a look at the farm, Xiao Xian went to other places. He would be away from the tribe for a while, but the exact date was uncertain. Before he left, he had to make some arrangements for the tribe. On the way to the animal pen, Xiao Xian happened to see Ao, who came to look for him. Ao was carrying a bulging animal skin bag in his hand. The drumming tribe just brought this over to pay off debts. Take a look and see how much it's worth. Ao handed over the bag in his hand. Xiao Xian took the bag and opened it. The yangguang outside was too strong for him to see clearly, so he went with Ao to a nearby wooden house. That was the temporary resting place for the people taking care of the animal pen. There were also patrolling warriors who would rest here for some water. Seeing Xiao Xian and Ao coming over, the people resting there quickly moved aside and stood guard nearby to prevent others from approaching. They knew that Xiao Xian and Ao must have something to talk about. Whether it was confidential or not, they would definitely stay away before they got permission. They would also prevent others from eavesdropping. After entering the house, Xiao Xian closed the open window, leaving only a small gap for ventilation. As soon as the house darkened, the water moonstones in the animal skin bag became more obvious. Not bright enough, not clear enough, not good enough. Xiao Xian could clearly distinguish the quality of the water moonstones in the animal skin bag with just one glance. A good water moonstone was not only bright enough to light up the house like a light bulb, but also looked pure. Otherwise, it wouldn't be one of the common currencies. But here, some of the lights were very dim and couldn't meet the needs of many people. Not to mention light bulbs, even torches couldn't compare. Some of the lights barely met the requirements, but the light was very cloudy. The quality was less than 1/10. These must have been selected by the drumming tribe. They must have given us some of their preferences, but this is all, Ao said. After the fusion of the fire seed, the drumming tribe had already tried to break away from the original fire seed and use the power of the merged fire seed to catalyze the production of water moonstones. But the time was still short, so the water moonstones produced couldn't be compared to the previous ones. Ao could understand this. What are your plans? Xiao Xian asked. Keep it. Because the quality of these goods isn't good enough, we can't charge them according to the previous price. However, during the construction of the Flaming River Castle, the drumming tribe helped us many times. At that time, they didn't accept any gifts from the Yinjiao. I think we should charge them at 30% of the original price, Ao said. 30% was close to 1/3 of the normal price of a water moonstone. According to the actual situation, the water moonstones that the drumming tribe took out had to be reduced by 90%. It could only be counted as 1/10 of the previous water moonstones. After all, those dull water moonstones could not be used at all. They could only be regarded as trash. Ao was actually very satisfied with the drumming tribe as his neighbor. With the Wuxia tribe as a reference, he liked the people of the drumming tribe more. In addition, the people of the drumming tribe had helped them a few times. Now that the drumming tribe had just been rebuilt and was undergoing changes, their lives were not very good. So he still leaned towards the drumming tribe. Because this was just his own personal opinion, Ao still had to ask for Xiaoxian's opinion. Giga was fine with it, but if he couldn't get Xiaoxian's approval, he still couldn't accept it. Alright, we'll do as you say. Xiaoxian put the water moon stones back and passed them to Ao. Those dull water moon stones will be distributed separately when the time comes. I know that. Ao didn't plan on using those dull water moon stones. Those dull water moon stones couldn't even illuminate the words on the animal skin scroll at a distance of a palm, let alone illuminate the road. When the time comes, we'll split the dark water moonstones and bring them to the farms. Tell them to put the dark water moonstones together at night and see if any insects come near, said Xiaoxian. The more crops there were in the farmlands, the more insects there would be, although there were people in charge of catching the insects. And even the green ducks would help to get rid of the insects. That was all during the day. The insects that were active at night were difficult to deal with. Someone once tried to drive them away with torches, and it was naturally effective. There were many creatures that were afraid of fire, and insects were also afraid of fire. However, they couldn't let the patrolmen drive them away with torches the whole night. Maybe it was because the aura of the Yinjiao people was too strong, but many birds didn't come near, and even fewer came at night. As a result, the nocturnal insects were even more rampant. The warm weather, the moist riverside, and the large farmlands were really a paradise for mosquitoes, especially those that came from the depths of the forest where ferocious beasts were everywhere. They were very annoying. Now they just happened to have some useless water moonstones to try. These water moonstones couldn't illuminate the area, but there was still some light, like the light from a mobile phone screen. Who knew if it could attract some nocturnal insects? Many insects at night were attracted to light, but they were not like the flying insects that flew to the fire. They would cleverly avoid the hot light source, the torches. Therefore, Xiaoxian planned to use these water moonstones to try. Even if they were useless, it didn't matter. He still had to try. When Xiaoxian said this, Ao had a hint of understanding. A person who had been a leader wasn't stupid. You mean the insects that are active at night might like the light from the water moonstones? Ao had the experience of walking outside at night with a water moonstone. He had also encountered some flying insects that kept approaching him, but at that time, he didn't think of the water moonstones. He only thought that it was because of himself. Now that he heard what Xiaoxian said, could it actually be the water moonstones? There are many insects that come out at night. They like the moon, but the moon is too far away for them to touch. If there are water moonstones, I don't know if they will be attracted to them. Xiaoxian explained. I see. Ao suddenly understood. At the same time, he thought to himself, this kid is indeed the Grand Elder. He knows a lot. We'll know when we try. Xiaoxian couldn't be sure without trying. There were definitely insects that liked the light, but he didn't know how useful these dim water moonstones were. The people of the drumming tribe should know about this, right? Ao asked again. Not necessarily. The drumming tribe used to be protected by the primitive fire seed. Many insects didn't dare to approach directly. Moreover, the river hadn't disappeared at that time. The insects on this side of the forest couldn't fly over. The insects on the other side of the forest couldn't cause much trouble. Now, although the two sides are close and some insects can fly over, the people of the drumming tribe use the water moonstones sparingly. It's unlikely that they know about this. But we can ask them. Xiaoxian said. You're right. Ao almost forgot that the primitive fire seed was a deterrent to many creatures. The core area of the drumming tribe was not as large as that of the Yinjiao tribe. The areas closer to the fire seed were more protected. Ao took the animal skin bag to the house by the river bank, where the chief of the drumming tribe, Fan Mu, was waiting. He looked very nervous. They also knew that the quality of the water moonstones was not as good as before, but these were already the best they had made during this time. Seeing Ao coming, the people of the drumming tribe looked at him expectantly. What did the Grand Elder Xiaoxian say? Fan Mu asked. We'll take 30% of the previous price. Ao said. Hearing that they could get 30% of the price, the people of the drumming tribe were surprised. In their opinion, 10% was too low. After the surprise, Fanmu said seriously, "Thank you." Of course, he knew that the Yinjiao was taking care of them. Otherwise, if they took the water moonstones to other places, the price would be reduced to less than 10%. For this, they were very grateful. The people of the Yinjiao were all good people. Next time, the water moonstones will be better, Fanmu promised. Their ability to make water moonstones was getting better. The moonlight was getting brighter, so it was easier to make water moonstones. In the future, there would be more high-quality water moonstones. Otherwise, they would be too embarrassed to take them out to pay off the debt. By the way, how do you deal with the slightly dim water moonstones in your tribe? Ao asked. Well, we keep them for ourselves. Fanmu was surprised. Those water moonstones that could not meet the requirements of lighting could only be regarded as the waste of the drumming tribe's practice of making water moonstones. If they didn't keep them for themselves, would they sell them? Wasn't it shameful? Your water moonstones. If you don't need them, don't throw them away. Ao said hesitantly. He was not sure whether Xiao Xian's night plan would work, but if it did, they would need more of those dim water moonstones. After all, the cost of those stones was low, so they could be used as waste. The people of the drumming tribe looked at Ao in confusion. They didn't understand what he meant. The first elder, may need some of these water moonstones. Ao wanted to talk about their plan, but after thinking about it, he stopped and directly mentioned Xiao Xian. The people of the drumming tribe didn't seem to know whether the water moonstones could attract insects or not. But I don't know if it will work. He has to try it first, and then I'll tell you. Ao Jia said. Okay. Fanmu said quickly. After returning to the drumming tribe from Yinjiao, Fanmu told the shaman. The shaman of the drumming tribe was very grateful to the Yinjiao when he learned that the water moonstones could be sold for 30% of the normal price. The dark water moonstones were another surprise. Although I don't know what the first elder Xiao Xian of Yinjiao wants to do, I hope he can succeed. The shaman said. If they need it, we can give them all of our water moonstones. Yes, I think so too, Fanmu said. Those dim water moonstones were just the failed products of their practice. They were useless in their hands. If the Yinjiao needed them, they would give them all to the Yinjiao to thank the Yinjiao for taking care of them. That night, during this time, the two moons in the sky were no longer crescent moons. They were much brighter. However, compared with the full moon, there was still a gap. Even so, if the two moons directly shone on the ground, those dim water moonstones might not be able to compete with the moonlight, and the effect would be greatly reduced. Fortunately, there were clouds in the sky tonight. Most of the time, the two moons were covered by clouds, which made it easier for Xiao Xian to carry out his plan. Xiao Xian looked at the clouds in the sky and carried a bag of water moonstones to the farmland. Chapter 631. When Xiao Xian arrived at the farm, Ao and the guards were already waiting there. They were all holding tools in their hands. Other than their own hunting weapons, there were also tools for guarding the farm, such as large nets made of vines, nets made of long poles, and giant bombs. These were usually prepared, but most of them were only used during the day. They were rarely used at night. Is everything ready? Xiao Xian asked. Yes, we were just waiting for you to start, Ao said. The farm guards who were called over were still puzzled. They didn't know why Ao called them over, but they would still follow the instructions of the two elders. Xiao Xian looked around and asked one of the guards, "Where are the bugs the most at night? Where are the bugs the most?" The guard thought for a moment, then pointed to Xiao Xian. "Over there." The crops planted there were more precious, mostly given by Jiju. It was also close to the 1,000-grain gold. Then let's go there and try. Xiao Xian walked over with the water moonstones in his hand. The two moons in the sky were covered by clouds not long after they came out, and the moonlight on the ground quickly disappeared. The bugs that were chirping somewhere paused when the moons disappeared, then continued chirping. It was very dark, but with everyone's familiarity with the farm, They wouldn't accidentally walk into a ditch. Even though it was dark, with their eyesight, even if they couldn't see clearly at night, they could still see the nearby scenery with the fire burning on the ground. Xiao Xian did not start at the edge of the field, but at a place a little distance away from the field. He poured out the inferior water moon stones from the animal skin bag, piled them together, and arranged them into a circle. "Extinguish the torches, everyone back off," Xiao Xian said. The people around him followed Xiao Xian's instructions and extinguished all the torches they were holding. Because of the banquet, many of the patrolling and guarding warriors were very thrifty. They rarely used water moonstones for illumination. Although they didn't think that the banquet would make their tribe poor, they felt that it was better to be thrifty. That was why when they knew they were going to prepare for the showing-off banquet, everyone started saving up. In the tribe, they wouldn't use water moonstones if they could use torches. Even though the Flaming River Grand Banquet had ended, they still didn't change this habit. That was why when Ao came to ask them, they couldn't tell if the water moonstones attracted insects, because they had been using torches recently. The surroundings were dark without any light. This made the area where the water moonstones were placed very obvious. Every single water moonstone was relatively dark, but when dozens of them were gathered together, the brightness also increased by a lot. Even though the brightness was still not comparable to that of a high-quality water moonstone, it was superior in that there were many of them. When they were gathered together, the area of light would increase. After retreating, Xiao Xian concealed his aura and tried his best to hide his presence. The others had already received Ao's instructions and knew what to do. When Xiao Xian and Ao concealed their auras, they quickly followed suit. But they all stared curiously at the area where the water moonstones were placed. What could those dim water moonstones do? Fish for insects? The surroundings were very quiet. There were faint sounds coming from the mountain where the tribesmen lived. There were also the sounds of insects in the nearby forest, but no one paid attention to them. Xiao Xian listened carefully to the sounds around him. In the fields there were some man-made ditches with flowing water. The night wind blew, and the leaves of the crops rubbed against each other, making a rustling sound. Xiao Xian tilted his head slightly and listened carefully to the sounds coming from one direction. It sounded like it came from the fields. Swoosh, swoosh, the sound of jumping came towards them. There were also the sounds of wings flapping rapidly in the sky. Those were the flying insects that were active at night. A slender figure appeared at the pile of rocks where the water moonstones were placed. The black figure was rather conspicuous among the pile of water moonstones that were emitting a dim light. It worked. Xiao Xian was delighted. When they saw the figure, the soldiers who had been staring at the farmland raised their eyebrows. Although they couldn't see it clearly, they knew what kind of insect it was just by looking at the figure. That kind of insect was one of the few that troubled them the most, because it often moved above ground. It was underground during the day, and only came out at night. They couldn't guard against it unless they built underground fences to block it. Moreover, that kind of insect wasn't afraid of the insect-repellent grass they burned. Even smoke couldn't drive them away. Every morning when they saw many more wormholes on the leaves of the fields, they gritted their teeth in anger. Who would have thought that the dimly glowing water moonstones placed there could actually attract those troublesome insects over? Almost at the same time as that insect, other nocturnal flying insects flew over from the sky. There were more and more of them. Soon, probably because they felt that there was no danger around, the other insects hiding in the trees, on the grass, and in the fields all flew over, as if something was attracting them. There were more and more black figures covering the water moonstones. They were big and small, long and short, winged and wingless, jumping and flying insects. They all started to gather there. Some even fought to get the spotlight. When the pile of water moonstones was almost completely covered by the insects, and the air was filled with the sound of flapping wings, Xiao Xian shouted in a low voice, "Move!" In an instant, the people holding the nets rushed over like arrows. With a few whistling sounds, the densely packed flying insects in the air were caught in the nets, and then swatted down. Pa! The flying insects in the nets were flattened. The insects on the ground were continuously swatted by the people holding the giant nets. At this time, The closer the insects were to the pile of water moonstones, the harder it was for them to escape the swatting range. After everything was over, Xiao Xian held a wooden stick and used the light from the water moonstones to look at the different types of insects. Some of the insects on the ground were not flattened, but they had lost the ability to move and couldn't go far. Xiao Xian was about to go on a long journey, and they were going downstream along the flaming river. Hence, the insects they would encounter might be similar to these. He wanted to see what kind of insects they had. Xiao Xian picked up a few insects and put them in a cloth bag he brought over. The insects he picked out were all intact and were rarely seen. Some of them looked very fierce and had poisonous stingers or fangs. The camouflage on their bodies made them easy to miss. If they weren't caught at night, they might not be noticed even if they saw them in the day. He had to let the people who were going on a long journey take a look, so they could be prepared. Ao had already ordered people to clean up the area and put the flattened insect corpses together. When the people who were taking care of the fields came tomorrow, they would see if they could make it into fertilizer. How is it? Ao came over and asked Xiao Xian. He looked quite happy. How could he not be happy? He knew that these useless water moonstones could attract insects. Although it might not solve the root of the problem, it could at least reduce the insects' harm to the fields at night. It was effective. That was enough. It's all right, but there are limitations. The insects we caught might not only eat the crops, Xiao Xian said. Also, if there are no clouds at night, these insects might not be as effective. It's more effective to use high-quality water moonstones. Of course I know that, but the insects that eat the crops are still the majority. As for the moonlight, judging from the sky, there might be clouds at night these few days. Even if it's just blocking the moonlight for a while, it's fine. Ao was already prepared for this. He didn't expect it to be effective, as long as it was effective. It was better than wasting the water moonstones and not being able to catch a single insect at night. Then we'll go to the drumming tribe tomorrow and get some more water moonstones? Ao asked. Sure. This was also a type of trap for insects at night. The next day, Ao went to the other side of the river to find the chief of the drumming tribe. Knowing that the Yinjiao needed those failed products, the chief of the drumming tribe directly dragged out a few big bags and gave them to Ao without hesitation. Even if Ao wanted to give them a price, Fan Mu firmly refused. For the people of the drumming tribe, these were really useless. It would be a waste to keep them in the warehouse. They couldn't sell them at a high price, so they just gave them all to Ao. However, Ao didn't take all of them. He took nearly 2/3 of them and left 1/3 for the people of the drumming tribe. By the way, he told the people of the drumming tribe about what happened last night, which was agreed by Xiao Xian. The people of the drumming tribe were now short of food, although they didn't like to eat insects. The insects that flew out from the forest on the other side of the river tasted good. Moreover, those insects had already begun to fly across the river. It was just that the people of the drumming tribe lived too close to the fire pit, where they used to put the fire seed. Even if the fire seed no longer existed, there were still some remnants of its smell in the fire pit, so those insects didn't dare to fly close. You can do this. Fan Mu felt very curious. They had owned the water moonstones for so long, but they had never seen such a situation before. You can try it from afar. Maybe you can catch some insects, Ao suggested. Thank you for telling us. The people of the drumming tribe were very grateful that the people of the Yinjiao tribe were willing to share their experience and skills. That night, they let the people on patrol try it. They really caught some insects and roasted them for supper. On the other side of the Yinjiao tribe, the waste water moonstones were distributed. At night, when the moon was covered by clouds, the sound of snapping could be heard in the farmland. Hey, be gentle. Don't slap them all into fertilizer. Let's see if they can be eaten. Someone waved a net and shouted. I know. The person holding a giant net made of rattan answered while slapping. After they finished patting, they would clean up the ground and pick out the large insects that were still intact. They would eat those that were edible and put those that were inedible aside to be used as fertilizer by the farmers. As for the insects that they did not recognize, they would carefully try to eat them. For the people of the Yinjiao tribe, eating insects wasn't a big deal. This kind of situation could be seen in several places around the farmland. For a long time after that, the guards of the Yinjiao tribe had one more activity at night, guarding the water moonstones and waiting for supper. Chapter 632. If the guards caught any insects at night, they would pick them out and store them for Xiao Xian to take a look when he was free. If there were any new unfamiliar insects, Xiao Xian would pick them out and put them together with the previous ones. After living in the forest for a long time, he could tell the threat of these insects based on their appearance. The more he knew, the more prepared he would be when he went on a long journey. Mosquito-repellent herbs and face paste were prepared. The further they went, the hotter the weather would be. When the rainy season ended and they left, they would have to wear sleeveless clothes. Some of them were even half naked. At that time, they would have to apply some face paste made from herbs. Not only could it disguise them, it could also repel mosquitoes. The rainy season was before the full moon. Looking at the moon in the sky now, the rainy season was approaching. Before the rainy season, the longboat tribe came again. However, this time, their goal was not just the Flaming River trading point. They were here to deliver ships to Yinjiao. Before they left the Flaming River trading point, both sides had a discussion. At that time, the longboat tribe agreed to send 2 ships over. Because of the disaster last year, the longboat tribe's fleet was greatly damaged. They did not even have enough ships for themselves. This year, the number of new ships they could build was limited. They could only send 2 ships to Yinjiao. Otherwise, they would have to continue waiting. Building ships took time too. Moreover, the longboat tribe was very particular when it came to building ships. They were very strict and spent a lot of effort on each ship. The 2 ships sent to Yinjiao looked similar to the ships in their fleet. They just had more sails. However, that was not all. This year, when the longboat tribe was building ships, they made many technical improvements. There were a few more slots in the ship. Xiao Xian went down to take a look. They were similar to watertight compartments. If there was an accident and only 1 or 2 compartments were damaged, the other compartments would still be fine. The buoyancy provided by these compartments would prevent the ship from sinking. This way, the ship would be more resistant to sinking. This was also why Xiao Xian admired the longboat tribe. They were always able to surprise people with their shipbuilding skills. Perhaps the disaster last year had inspired the longboat tribe to build watertight compartments. Or maybe the longboat tribe already had this idea. No one could be sure. Even without these, ships of the same size made from the same materials were sturdier than others. Even Xiao Xian did not know how many secrets were hidden in this. In terms of shipbuilding skills, the longboat tribe lived up to their name. They were indeed much better than other tribes. This time, the longboat tribe brought over 2 ships with sincerity. They were much better than the ships they gave to Yinjiao in the fearsome beast forest because of the green-face-fanged beast. At that time, the ships the longboat tribe gave them looked okay. But when it came to actual use, they could not compare to these 2 ships. Even if the 2 ships collided, the first to be destroyed would be the old ships. Seeing that Yinjiao was satisfied with these 2 ships, the people who delivered the ships sighed in relief. For some reason, they could be arrogant in front of other tribes, but when they met Yinjiao, they always felt weak. Especially when they met Xiao Xian, they were always worried that he would spit fire with a flick of his sleeves. After the inspection, the longboat tribe went to the Flaming River trading point to buy goods. There were many things here that were very attractive to them. Other than beast skin and meat, there was also fish skin glue and wood. These were all very attractive to them. The wood they asked Yinjiao to help them find was stored in the warehouse. When they left, they would bring some back. The sturdy ancient wood in the fearsome beast forest had made them jealous for a long time. 2 days after the longboat tribe delivered the ships, the rainy season began. The continuous rain made the Flaming River trading point quiet down. The busy people finally had some free time. Zheng Luo passed the information he gathered during this period to Xiao Xian. They knew about 3 more tribes in the Flaming River area, but they were slightly further away from here. Also, they only knew the general location, not the exact location. One of the tribes should be similar to the Luo tribe you mentioned before. They brought a lot of fishing nets with them, so they should be a fishing tribe. However, they were luckier than the Luo tribe and survived the disaster unscathed. There's another tribe. Zheng Luo told Xiao Xian everything he knew. Xiao Xian recorded everything down on his animal skin scroll. He would have a chance to confirm these when he traveled downstream. After collecting the information, Xiao Xian returned to the headquarters. He went up the mountain to find Gigu to discuss the final candidates for the expedition. There were 200 people. They had pretty much decided and needed to do a final check. When he arrived at the top of the mountain, Xiao Xian happened to see the two former shamans, who had retired as elders, arguing about something. Since Guizhe took over as the new shaman, the two elders no longer lived in the house that belonged to the shaman of the tribe. Instead, they built two houses next to each other, so that it was convenient for them to discuss things. However, they quarreled every time they talked. When Xiao Xian went over, the two elders were almost hitting each other with their crutches. "What's going on?" Xiao Xian asked. "Xian, you're just in time. Come take a look at my new drawing," the old man said as he pulled Xiao Xian into the house. Xiao Xian looked at where the old man was pointing. There was a stone slab that was not very thick. On the stone slab, there was a mess of paint. What was he looking at? Seeing Xiao Xian's puzzled expression, the old man also noticed the problem with the stone slab. "Oh, not that one. That's something I drew before. It's this one." The shaman pointed at a wide leaf on the table beside him. The leaf was also drawn with red paint. This one was much clearer. The painting on the leaf surprised Xiao Xian. He thought the old man was used to painting things, such as people or things he had seen recently, important things that had happened, etc. Generally, it was a painting with a narrative nature. However, the drawing on the leaf was a scene from the Flaming River Trading Point's banquet not long ago. Although the shaman's drawing was very simple, it did not stop Xiao Xian from recognizing the outline and shape of the drawing. Xiao Xian had heard about this scene many times. Someone had also drawn it for him, although it was not very vivid. "This is the ancestor's flame giant." Xiao Xian was puzzled. He did not understand what the old man was talking about. These two were arguing so fiercely because of the ancestor's flame giant? Yes. The old man was very excited. He carefully picked up the leaf and pointed at the drawing on it. "What do you think? This drawing is simple and clear. It shows the ancestor's charm," Xiao Xian said. "I'm not asking you about the drawing. I'm asking you, what do you think after seeing the ancestor like this?" The old man asked again. "What do I think? What thoughts could he have in front of the ancestor?" And it was a blurry flame giant. Xiao Xian still could not grasp the main point. "Do you think the ancestor looks especially good like this?" the old man asked expectantly. "Especially good? How is it good?" Xiao Xian continued to be puzzled. It was rare to hear the word good from a native of Yinjiao. In the end, it was the old woman who spoke up. "He wants to make a new ceremonial robe based on the ancestor's flame giant." A new ceremonial robe? Xiao Xian was stunned. He looked at the drawing on the leaf again. Looking at it this way, there was indeed a kind of elegance and heroism of riding the wind. But didn't Yinjiao people dislike this kind of style? Didn't they all think that this kind of robe was useless for hunting? It was ugly as hell. Even Xiao Xian's thinking was affected by the years of exposure. Sometimes his aesthetic standards were abnormal. But now Xiao Xian heard what the old man said. He thought the ancestor's style was really beautiful, and that it was a hint from the ancestor that it was time to change the ceremonial robe. But this was not a big problem. In Yinjiao people's hearts, the ancestor's style was good. Even if they didn't like it in the past, they would try to accept it if it was made by the ancestor. The old man wanted to change the ceremonial robe of Yinjiao tribes, but the old woman objected. It wasn't that she objected to the ancestor's style. She also thought the ancestor's style was good, but she didn't think everyone had to wear it. The ancestor was a first-generation shaman, so the robe could only be made for shamans. Xiao Xian imagined the elegance of those people, and then he imagined the tribesmen wearing animal skins, horns, and necklaces of animal teeth. They also had a cyan broadsword as wide as a person in their hands, white beast claw shoes, and a colorful snake belt around their waist. This strong contrast. You two can continue your discussion. Many of the changes were not caused by Xiaoxian. Instead, the people of this world changed spontaneously due to certain events. Chapter 633. This year's rainy season wasn't long. It ended in less than 20 days. After the weather cleared up, the temperature rose rapidly. They were about to welcome the hottest period of the year. At this time, the two moons were getting bigger and bigger. They didn't need torches at night to see what was going on around them. After Xiaoxian successfully protected the 1,000-grain gold from the second calamity, he brought his men onto the ship to prepare for this long journey. After the rainy season, the flaming river's water level rose again. Because it washed away a lot of soil, the river water had a muddy yellow color. Looking at the flowing river, Xiaoxian bid farewell to the tribesmen and set sail with 200 selected people. There were 2 ships, each with 100 people. Xiaoxian's ship was in front. Actually, the 2 ships sent by the longboat tribe were big enough to carry 200 people. They could even carry 500 people. However, the ships were loaded with goods and used up some space. Plus, if one of the ships met with an accident, the other could still be used to complete the rest of the journey. The 2 ships with Yinjiao totems left the Yinjiao headquarters. They raised their sails and sailed down the flaming river. They definitely wouldn't bring any other fearsome beasts on this long journey. Cha-Cha was an exception because it could fly. Plus, if Xiaoxian wasn't in the Yinjiao tribe, it wouldn't be able to stay by itself. That was why Cha-Cha was tagging along for this long journey. It could help Xiaoxian observe the situation from afar. After all, the ship's view was limited. Half a day later, Xiaoxian put away his telescope and ordered the crew to dock and put up a plaque. After the Flaming River was named, the plaque with the name Flaming River wasn't placed too far away. After all, the people in charge of putting up the plaque weren't traveling teams. They could only travel a limited distance. After that, they relied on the trading point to attract people from other tribes to spread the word. Now their team was going to travel further, so naturally, they would put up a plaque along the way. Hence, from here onwards, Xiaoxian would ask people to put up a plaque along the way. When the people who were planting the tombstones were busy on the shore, there would also be people guarding nearby to prevent them from being attacked. This was no longer the territory they were familiar with, so they had to be more vigilant. Xiaoxian asked Cha-Cha to bring him up into the sky. After flying around, he took out an animal skin scroll and opened it up. He took out a fine animal brush and dipped it in some paint. Then he began to draw circles on the scroll. He was replenishing the map. Since the tribe was going to live near the Flaming River for a long time, they needed to know more about the river banks. It was very simple on the other side of the forest where ferocious beasts roamed. The terrain was similar, and there were no people living there. If there were, the Yinjiao ancestors who had been isolated by the Great River would have known about it long ago. They wouldn't have not seen any outsiders for nearly 1,000 years. What Xiaoxian wanted to observe was the other side. Thanks to the disaster last year, the changes on both sides of the river were different. One side sank while the other rose, causing one side to be lower and the other side to be higher. Xiaoxian and the rest could only see the lower side from the boat. Fortunately, the lower side was also the side they needed to observe. It was far away from the ferocious beast's territory, and most of the tribes lived there. The boat also sailed downstream. After planting the tombstones, everyone rested for a while before continuing their journey. Their daily routine was more or less the same. Sometimes, they would meet some ferocious beasts that ran to the river to drink water. However, these beasts couldn't swim, so they could only roar at Xiaoxian and the rest. After this, will there be more ferocious beasts that can swim across the river to the other side? Duoli asked. Probably not. Tua didn't think so. The ferocious beasts in the forest know where the best place for them is. At most, they will run over because of an accident, but in the end, they will still return to the forest. Tua had a lot of experience, so he could guess the habits of many ferocious beasts. No wonder there aren't many ferocious beasts crossing the river. Duoli nodded. There are other reasons too. Xiaoxian put away the animal skin roll in his hand and said, In the memories of many ferocious beasts, this place should be very dangerous. Coupled with the disaster last year, there must have been a lot of activity here. The ferocious beasts that originally lived near the river bank may have left far away, just like the night swallows that used to live near our tribe. Perhaps they ran to other places when they were taking refuge, and then chose a new place to live. So in the short term, there shouldn't be many ferocious beasts crossing this river. After a pause, Xiao Xian continued. Besides, there are tribes living on the other side of the river. Even if these tribes aren't close to each other, they will at least affect the ferocious beasts that come over. After all, there are fire seeds in the tribes. As soon as Xiao Xian mentioned fire seeds, Duo Li and Tua understood. The people of Yinjiao no longer had fire seeds, so they often forgot to think about fire seeds. However, there were many tribes living here that still had fire seeds. No matter how small the tribe, their fire seed would still have a certain deterrent effect on the ferocious beasts in the forest. In the next few days, the situation on both sides of the flaming river was similar. There was nothing new. Xiao Xian continued to fill up the map. He could sense if there were any tribes nearby. They were too far away from the river, so he couldn't sense human auras. However, he could sense the aura of fire seeds. Although it wasn't obvious, and some tribes even tried to cover it up, Xiao Xian could still sense it even if the shamans of the tribes came here personally. Due to time constraints, he couldn't go to each tribe to investigate. However, as long as he could sense the presence of a fire seed, he could understand some basic information. This was a new ability that Xiao Xian discovered recently. A few years ago, if he wanted to know what a tribe's fire seed was like, he had to get close to the tribe. Just like when he first crossed the river and sensed the drumming tribe's fire seed at the drumming tribe, now he didn't need to be too close to feel it. Sometimes, because a tribe was too far away, he could only sense a vague presence. 10 days later, Xiao Xian had marked 7 dots on the map. 4 of the dots had totems drawn beside them, while the other 3 didn't. Those dots represented a tribe living there. If you looked closely, you would see that the tribes with totems were closer to the river bank. The tribes without totems were further away from the river bank. Xiao Xian couldn't pinpoint the exact locations of these tribes. He could only get a rough idea of where they were. The map he drew could only be used as a rough reference. At least it would let the Yinjiao people know how many tribes lived in the Flaming River area. If more people came to the Flaming River trading point in the future, he would get more information. Then he would fill up the map and take it one step at a time. If we go further, it should be the drumming tribe, right? Duo Li asked. Yes, that's what Zheng Luo told me. Xiao Xian looked at the information Zheng Luo gave him about the drumming tribe. The drumming tribe was the furthest from Yinjiao, so Xiao Xian remembered it clearly. The drumming tribe was the tribe that sold fishing nets at the Flaming River trading point. It was said that they lived by the Flaming River too. They were luckier than the Luo tribe that was wiped out during the natural disaster. They didn't suffer much damage, which meant that they were further away from the river bank. Xiao Xian focused. If he couldn't concentrate, he might not be able to sense the tribes further away from the river bank. Although the drumming tribe was good at making fishing nets, and must have caught fish often, before the natural disaster, this river wasn't easy to catch fish. They might have been fishing in other rivers further away from the river bank. Xiao Xian told Cha-Cha in the sky to keep an eye on the rivers nearby. If he sensed anyone, he would alert him. Another day passed. Xiao Xian didn't sense the presence of any foreign tribe's fire seed. Cha-Cha, who was given an important task, also didn't see any signs of human activity. Other than the Flaming River, there were no other rivers nearby. There were no lakes either. At most, there were a few thin mountain springs. Perhaps because of the lack of rivers, there weren't many plants growing in places far away from the Flaming River. The rolling mountains looked very monotonous. On both sides of the river, there were 2 different sceneries. On one side of the river, there were lush forests. From a high vantage point, it was verdant and lush. Further away, there were towering ancient trees. Compared to the other side, it was like long hair and short hair. There were no other rivers. Just by looking at the forest, one could tell that it wasn't suitable for farming. The vegetation wasn't lush, and there weren't many beasts living there either. If that was the case, the possibility of a tribe living in this area was even lower. Is the drumming tribe really here? Are they lying? Duoli asked. It wasn't just Duoli, the others thought so too. Not every tribe would tell the truth when they went to the Flaming River trading point. Some would only give a rough location. Even if you really went there, you might not be able to find them. Just like the drumming tribe, you knew where they lived, but very few people could find their nest. Some tribes didn't even tell the truth. They even pointed in the wrong direction. Maybe we've already passed by the drumming tribe, Tua said. On Xiaoxian's map, there were 3 areas marked with tribes living there. They didn't sense any totems. Perhaps the drumming tribe was in these 3 areas. That's possible. Xiaoxian nodded in agreement with Tuo's guess. After some thought, he took out the fishing net the drumming tribe brought to the Flaming River trading point. The people from the drumming tribe brought the fishing net to the Flaming River trading point to trade for things. These fishing nets were kept by Zheng Luo. Xiaoxian brought 2 fishing nets from the drumming tribe with him this time. If they couldn't hunt any beasts, they could try fishing with these nets. The drumming tribe's fishing net was different from the Luo tribe's. The Luo tribe's fishing net was thinner, while the drumming tribe's fishing net had different sizes. The weaving style was also very different from the Luo tribe's. There were more patterns on the same net. Looking at the nets, Xiaoxian turned to Duoli, who was fishing with a fishing rod. Call Kuan-Tu over. I have something to ask him. Duoli nodded and kept his fishing rod. He quickly ran to the cabin to look for Kuan-Tu's day. This time, Xiaoxian chose close to 100 guards from the Flaming River trading point. This was half of the expedition team. The guards who often worked at the Flaming River trading point had seen many tribes and had some impressions of unfamiliar tribes. Kuan-Tu was a guard at the Flaming River trading point. He was also one of the people who had come into direct contact with the drumming tribe. Chapter 634. Kuan-Tu, who was resting in the cabin, was quickly called out. Grand Elder, you're looking for me? Kuan-Tu asked. Unlike Tua, Guang and the rest who grew up with Xiaoxian, he was one of the Yinjiao wanderers who returned to the tribe. Because he performed well and improved quickly, he was now very active in the tribe. Before joining this expedition, Kuan-Tu often guarded the Flaming River trading point and interacted with many other tribes. Kuan-Tu had always respected Xiaoxian. It was Xiaoxian and the rest who went to the grasslands to meet them. If it wasn't for him, they wouldn't have been able to leave the grasslands alive, even if the fire seed in Yinjiao was reignited. Plus, after some things happened in Xiaoxian's current status in the tribe, Kuan-Tu couldn't address him as casually as the others. That was why he called Xiaoxian Grand Elder. Every time he saw him, Xiaoxian waved at Kuan-Tu's day. Come take a look. Are these the fishing nets the drumming tribe brought to the trading point? Kuan-Tu went over and squatted down to examine the 2 nets beside Xiaoxian's hands. Because there were definitely more than one tribe selling fishing nets at the trading point, many of the nets looked very similar. Even if he knew at first glance, he had to take a closer look. He didn't want to embarrass himself in front of the Grand Elder. After examining both nets carefully, Kuan-Tu nodded and confirmed. Yes, both of them. The drumming tribe's fishing nets are different from other tribes. The mesh on the net is also different from other nets. Plus, there are many parts of the net that I don't understand. The drumming tribe didn't explain much. Yes, the 2 nets of the drumming tribe were different from the nets of other tribes. Some parts even gave people the feeling that the nets were woven wrongly. They didn't explain? Xiaoxian pointed at a few seemingly redundant parts of the net. Yes, I was curious when I saw it, so I asked. But they didn't explain. They only said it's like this when weaving nets. But Kuan-Tu hesitated for a moment, then continued. I think there must be some other secrets. At that time, the people of the drumming tribe didn't look at me well. What's wrong? Duo Li and Tua were curious. I don't know if I'm right. I just feel like they're looking at me like I don't know what's good for me. Kuan-Tu scratched his head. Because they used to live in the grassland without the protection of a tribe, they had to rely on other tribes to live. It was inevitable that they had to act according to other people's wishes. Kuan Tu was one of the more talented leaders among the Yinjiao wanderers in the grassland. He was more sensitive in many aspects, which was why Xiao Xian called Kuan Tu over instead of others. So, at that time, although the people of the drumming tribe didn't show it on their faces, and restrained themselves very quickly, he could still catch the disdainful look of country bumpkins who don't know what's good for them. In the Flaming River trading point, very few tribes would look down on the Yinjiao people. It was normal for them to dislike each other, but it was rare for them to look at each other with such disdain. Tell me about it. Xiao Xian's interest was piqued. To understand the people of a tribe, many details could be gleaned, and the tools they used was one of them. During that period of time, most of the tribes living in the Flaming River area were small tribes. Because of this, when they saw the Yinjiao army, they were even more nervous and uneasy. But whether it was Zheng Luo's or Kuan Tu's opinion, the drumming tribe clearly did not belong in this category. Although the people of the Ji tribe were also surprised and curious, when they were in the Flaming River trading point, they were more arrogant than the other tribes. Xiao Xian was not unfamiliar with this. Usually, tribes like this were the ones who had the upper hand in their own territory. They were not the ones who were oppressed. So the drumming tribe is definitely not a small tribe like the drumming tribe. Xiao Xian picked up a net and asked Duo Li, Tuo and Kuan Tu to pull it open. Then Xiao Xian carried a wooden stake over. They had cut it down and left it to dry on the boat. When the time came, they would chop it up and use it as firewood. Xiao Xian single-handedly picked up a tree that was as thick as a person. He looked at the net that was more than 10 meters long that was pulled up by the three of them. If it was fully opened, the net would be more than 20 meters long, almost 30 meters long. Zheng Luo had only gotten these two nets not long before Xiao Xian left. He was too busy to study them, so Xiao Xian decided to give it a try. Looking away from the net, Xiao Xian looked at the wooden stake in his hand. Then, he used his knife to poke a few holes in the wooden stake and stuck a few branches in it. It looked like the horns of a deer. Then, Xiao Xian grabbed the wooden stake with horns on both sides and approached the net. When Xiao Xian first approached the net, he couldn't see anything. However, when Xiao Xian touched the net at the other end of the wooden pile and continued to move forward, the net that originally looked normal made a ping sound. It was as if a switch had been turned on. As it was turned on, the net began to change. Whether it was the three people pulling the net or the people around them, they all stared at the net. They saw that there seemed to be another net on the net. When the net maintained its original grid to block the prey, the hidden net began to shrink towards the spot where the prey hit the net. Because Xiao Xian's movements weren't fast, and he used his strength slowly, all the changes were clearly seen by everyone present. This, two nets. Isn't this a fishing net used to catch fish? How can this be? Everyone was astonished. After Xiao Xian continued to use his strength to push the wooden stake forward, the second net was finally pulled in. The second net was firmly tied to the wooden stake. The first net was like a bag that caught the prey that hit it, while the second net played a binding role. While trapping the prey, it also tied up the bag at the same time. Such a net with dummy posts is secretly set up on the path that the prey must pass. If the prey runs into it, or is chased by the hunters and runs into it, they will definitely be tied up. If a deer with horns hits it, its antlers will be tightly entangled, or even its neck. The more it struggles, the tighter the rope will get, and it might even be strangled to death. Xiao Xian said. Because he had some knowledge about lassos, Xiao Xian could see more clearly than the others. The people in the tribe also knew about this, so they did not doubt Xiao Xian's words. This net is used to catch deer, sheep and other prey of similar sizes. Xiao Xian concluded. He did not know what kind of plant this net was made from, but it had been refined to make it even sturdier. It was more than enough to catch normal beasts. It really isn't a fishing net. Duo Li was shocked. That means the drumming tribe doesn't necessarily live near the Flaming River. Maybe they don't even live near the Flaming River, but somewhere else inland? Tuo pondered. No, they definitely live near the Flaming River, and they definitely aren't too far from it. Xiao Xian said with certainty. As he spoke, Xiao Xian picked up the second net. This net was different from the first one. The method of weaving and the straw rope were different as well. The first net was made from straw rope that was tightly woven and very sturdy. There was no way to find a gap in the rope. If a thorn wanted to pierce through the rope, it would take a lot of effort. But the second net was made from straw rope that was completely different. It was made from thin strands of plant material that had not undergone the weaving stage. He had Duo Li and the others pull up the net again. For the second net, Xiao Xian did not use a wooden pole to test it. Instead, he started from the food scraps. There were some leftover piranha bones there, which Duo Li had caught and roasted when he was bored. The piranha's large head and mouth full of sharp teeth were very recognizable. Xiao Xian broke off a piranha's skull. When it opened its mouth, the sharp teeth were very obvious. Xiao Xian placed the fish's mouth full of sharp teeth on the net and bit it. Then he moved his jaws, so it looked like he was biting the net continuously. If it was a normal fishing net, there would definitely be teeth marks left on the rope. If the net was not sturdy, it would be quickly torn apart by these piranhas. But now, this net seemed to be in perfect condition, even after the fish's mouth closed dozens of times. On the ropes that were woven into the fishing net, there was a thread-like structure that separated towards the sides of the fangs when the fangs bit. Therefore, every time the fangs bit, they would directly pass through the net rope. When the fangs opened their mouths, the fangs would break away from the net rope, and the net rope composed of many thin threads would merge into one again. This is made to catch piranhas? Duo Li curiously picked up the net again to take a closer look. He even found a fish head to test it out. It really is. Usually, there were fangs in the rivers inland, but there were not many of them here. They were also of different species, so there was no need to specially weave a net like this to catch them. The most likely reason was that the other party made this net to catch piranhas in the flaming river. After all, there were many piranhas here. The people of the drumming tribe are really good at weaving webs. Although he had never seen it before, Tua had to admit it. If it wasn't for Xiao Xian pointing this out, they wouldn't have been able to see it so quickly. If this fishing net gets wet, the rope will be slippery. The fangs can easily pass through the rope, but they won't be able to break it in a short time. Xiao Xian touched the wet part of the net and passed it to everyone. It really is. Kuan Tu scratched his head again. No wonder the drumming tribe people looked at him like that. He really thought he was blind and couldn't tell how good this net was. With this net weaving technique, the drumming tribe definitely won't starve. In fact, they'll live a rich life, Xiao Xian said. But the drumming tribe isn't here. We followed the river and didn't see the drumming tribe. Otherwise, Grand Elder would definitely know. Kuan Tu didn't understand. Since we still haven't seen them, then the drumming tribe might be even further away from us. Xiao Xian looked ahead. In the Flaming River region, even if they were far away, they would still know about the Flaming River trading point. Chapter 635. The drumming tribe's matter made everyone in the group take it seriously. If the drumming tribe wasn't an aggressive tribe, then it was fine. Even if it was just a small fight, it wouldn't affect Yinjiao. But if the drumming tribe was aggressive, then they had to be on guard. Of course, Xiao Xian didn't think that the drumming tribe was an aggressive tribe that stole other people's belongings for a living. If they specialized in stealing, then why would they have the time to improve their skills? Plus, if the drumming tribe was a high-profile tribe, why hadn't anyone heard of them before? Even Yinjiao's expedition teams had never heard of this tribe when they visited several large trading areas in the inland. The expedition teams had never even mentioned them before, so the Pu tribe didn't know of their existence either. Then, the most likely explanation for the drumming tribe was that they were far away, remote enough, and lived by the Flaming River. They weren't high-profile either. With this analysis, Xiao Xian felt a lot more at ease. The forest by the river started to become lush again. He didn't know if there would be any tribes in a place like this. Xiao Xian rode Cha Chao in the air for a while before landing on the boat to replenish his map. Actually, there wasn't much important information. The only landmarks on the map were mountains and rivers. There weren't many mountains in this area anymore, but there was more and more water. Xiao Xian saw lakes and rivers in the air. There were more animals living in the forest too. Some were near, some were near, some were sharp, some were low, and all sorts of noises could be heard in the forest. Xiao Xian was replenishing his map in the cabin when he heard a commotion outside. Duo Li and the others must have caught a fish that they had never seen before. Otherwise, there wouldn't be such a commotion. There had been many similar incidents recently. The further they went downstream, the more types of fish there seemed to be. When he went out to take a look, Xiao Xian saw Guang holding a strange fish that was as thick as an arm. The strange fish had muddy yellow and black patterns all over its body. If it were to stop by the shore for a rest, it would be difficult to discover it. It had a suction cup-like mouth, and its body was slippery. However, Guang was able to tightly pinch the bottom of the strange fish's head with one hand, so that the strange fish could only twist its body vigorously. In its suction cup-like mouth, many small hook-like teeth formed concentric rings that rotated like gears. However, it could not touch Guang at all. The teeth in his mouth could only rotate at a limited angle. After about 90 degrees, they would rotate back again. Dory took a wooden stick and stuck it into the fish's disc-shaped mouth. After a few moments, the stick was ground into sawdust. The strange fish also had two large fan-like pectoral fins, each of which could cover a person's face. However, when Guang grabbed it, the fins closed up, so it looked narrow and slippery. After playing with the fish for a while, they began to process the strange fish, thinking about roasting it and eating it. Hey, there's a hook in the fish's stomach. Tua, who was in charge of slaughtering the fish, took out the hook from the fish's stomach. After washing away the bloodstains, the shape of the hook was more obvious. Tua passed it to Xiao Xian. It's man-made. The pinky-long stone hook had a curved tail and was polished to a very sharp point. The strange fish's mouth could crush wooden sticks, but it could not crush hard stones. That was why this clearly polished hook was left in the fish's stomach, instead of being ground into sawdust. Is there a tribe nearby? Or did it come from somewhere else? Tua looked at the forest by the shore and guessed. The people in the group were more inclined to the former, so the people on the two boats were on high alert. Xiao Xian did not sense the aura of the fire seed. Even if there was a tribe, they had not encountered one yet. After another half a day, when Xiao Xian and the others were resting by the shore to put up a monument, the people who went into the forest to hunt found some traces. A broken pottery jar half buried in the soil. The pottery jar was very small, but very delicate. It was a painted pottery, but what made Xiao Xian more interested was the pattern on the jar. On the palm-sized pottery jar, the dark net pattern was drawn very carefully. It was obvious that the person who drew it must have been very attentive. It was not difficult to draw a net pattern, but it was difficult to draw an accurate and delicate pattern on a curved pottery. It was not easy, and a little carelessness could destroy the whole thing. On the pottery jar they found, there were hundreds of densely drawn lines on the curved surface. The lines were drawn very evenly and smoothly. The distance between the lines was very precise, as if it had been measured with a ruler. There was no sense of stagnation. One could imagine the skill of the person who drew it. In addition to those fine interlaced lines, there were some thicker arcs and ribbon-like stripes near the mouth and bottom of the bottle, as well as 2/3 of the body of the bottle. Apart from that, there was a dense interlaced net pattern. There was a strong contrast between the two. The contrast between the thickness and the thinness gave a very strong visual effect. Making pottery also required passion. In Yinjiao, the person in charge of making pottery was Xing. The longer Xing worked with pottery, the deeper his understanding. He once said that a pottery made with passion and a pottery made with perfunctory effort gave a very different feeling. Not to mention the shape of the pottery, just the pattern on it. Although the pottery jar in Xiao Xian's hands was damaged, the fine brush strokes were still clear after the soil was washed away. The visual impact was strong enough at first glance. Otherwise, it would not have been discovered by the Yinjiao people who were looking for food. At that time, the pottery jar was half buried in the ground, and there was grass around it. Only a small figure peeked out from the grass, but it was discovered at a glance. It was obvious that this pottery was not made casually. When making it, the person who made it poured enough passion and patience into it, and focused on this palm-sized jar. Perhaps the things that were stored in it were very important. Did you find the totem? Tua asked. Xiao Xian shook his head. I don't know yet. Maybe we didn't find it, or maybe the totem is damaged or missing, or maybe there is no totem on it at all. The possibility of the second and third guesses is higher. Since the person who made this pottery was serious, then they must have been more careful when they drew the totem, and the emotions they put in were stronger. If there was a totem on it, even if Xiao Xian had never seen the totem of the tribe who made it, he would have recognized it at a glance. We don't know what kind of tribe made this pottery. Could it be the drumming tribe? Duo Li said. Xiao Xian looked at the pottery jar in his hands, deep in thought. Duo Li's guess was also what he was thinking. Different tribes had different totem patterns and habits, so they had different preferences. For example, some liked cloud patterns, while others liked animal patterns. And now, the patterns on this pottery jar belonged to the network pattern. Clearly, this tribe preferred net-like patterns. The drumming tribe. It was possible. Xiao Xian did not throw the pottery jar away. He brought it back to the boat, and let everyone look around to see if they could find any other clues. With more clues, they would understand more. Chapter 636. After discovering the reticulated clay jar, they continued to travel downstream. Xiao Xian sensed the presence of other tribes, but they were further away from the flaming river, so he couldn't tell what kind of tribes they were. The only thing he was sure of was that they weren't strong tribes. Otherwise, their fire seeds wouldn't be so weak that Xiao Xian couldn't sense them at all. When they were inserting the tombstones, they also found some traces of human life. However, very few people came to the riverside. Although there were traces, they were not new. Later on, the utensils and tools were found. There were also pottery and tools with patterns on them, as well as pottery and tools of other patterns. It was obvious that more than one tribe had been here before. There should be more tribes in the future. On the map, Xiao Xian marked the location of a tribe's fire seed on the animal skin scroll. Why don't we go and take a look? Duo Li asked Xiao Xian. If they could go ashore and find the location of the fire seed, they would be able to find out what kind of tribe it was. No need. Xiao Xian kept the map. We don't have to care too much about that. It's a waste of time to look for them one by one. The flaming river is very long, and we don't even know if we can finish in time. We don't have to worry about those small tribes for now. Looking ahead at the flaming river, Xiao Xian said. Also, I feel like there's a slightly bigger tribe up ahead. It was rare for Xiao Xian to say slightly bigger. Most of the tribes in the flaming river region were small tribes with few people. Some tribes only had a few hundred people. It was pitifully small. Duo Li and the others didn't even know how these tribes survived until now. Hearing Xiao Xian say slightly bigger tribe made everyone's spirits lift. Was there finally a slightly bigger tribe? If the tribes in the Flaming River region only had a few hundred people, they wouldn't be a problem for Yinjiao. However, the overall strength of the tribes in the Flaming River region was too weak. Even if they worked together, they wouldn't be able to take on a corner of the central region. Did you notice that the Flaming River gets wider as we go downstream? Xiao Xian asked. It's true. If Xiao Xian hadn't mentioned it, they wouldn't have noticed. Looking at the two banks of the Flaming River, they did seem to be a little further away. They had been walking on the side that was far away from the fearsome beast's territory. Now that they looked at the forest on the other side, the things there seemed to have become smaller. Just as Xiao Xian had said, the lower reaches of the Flaming River had become wider. Xiao Xian roughly estimated that the distance between the two shores was definitely more than 1,000 meters. Moreover, Duo Li and the others had been catching more and more types of fish from the river. It wasn't just piranhas anymore. Fortunately, the boat could still sail normally in the river. There were no wood-eating insects or river beasts in the river. No, to be exact, it was just that there were no giant beasts living in the river in the past. However, it was unknown whether there were any ferocious beasts that entered the river from the land of ferocious beasts. The wider the river, the wider the living environment. Perhaps some ferocious beasts that liked water had already entered the river from the forest. Be careful. Pay attention to the movements in the water. We'll continue to stay close to the bank, Xiao Xian said. Usually, there were fewer large aquatic beasts near the bank. In the middle of the river, there were more large aquatic beasts. Xiao Xian and the others still didn't know if there were any giant beasts in the river that they didn't know about. It was always better to be careful. Moreover, if they were close to the bank, they would be able to get to the bank in time if something happened. Where's Cha-Cha? Xiao Xian looked around at the sky. He didn't see Cha-Cha. Went to look for food. I didn't see him just now, Tua said. Xiao Xian didn't mind. It had been like this for a while. Every time he brought Xiao Xian up to the sky to observe, Cha-Cha would run away to play by himself. Perhaps he would go to scout ahead. Or perhaps he would run to the forest near the land of ferocious beasts to look for food. At a certain section of the river downstream of Xiao Xian and the others, in the middle of the river, there was a wooden raft that was shaking violently. On the wooden raft, there was a young man with a face full of panic. He held on tightly to the raft to prevent himself from being thrown off. If he was on the wooden raft, he still had a chance to live. However, if he was thrown into the water, he would be finished. The reason why the wooden raft was shaking so violently was because there was something in the river pushing against it. On the bank, there were a few young men standing there and shouting. Even if they wanted to help, there was nothing they could do. They couldn't go into the water. If they went into the water, they would die. If they were swallowed by the fish in the river, they would also die. Shoot arrows? It was useless. The fish in the river was too smart. It wouldn't give them a chance to shoot. It would either hide under the water or behind the wooden raft. If they shot arrows, they might hurt the people on the wooden raft. They had to be careful when shooting arrows. They didn't dare to shoot randomly. Big brother, hold on. They have already gone to call for help. A 10-year-old child shouted from the bank. Use the oar to hit it. Bullshit. Don't listen to him. Don't hit it with the oar. That will only make it angrier. Boluo, hold on tight to the wooden raft. Hold steady and stall for time. Another slightly older young man hurriedly shouted. These people were so anxious that their faces turned ashen. They didn't even have time to wipe off their sweat. Throwing stones and hitting water also couldn't attract the attention of the strange fish in the river. Their original target wasn't the strange fish. It was another type of large fish that was about the length of 2 people. The net they made was specifically to catch that type of large fish. However, they didn't expect the strange fish to suddenly appear. Not only did it kill their prey, it almost ate them all. If it wasn't for Bo Luo attracting its attention, they wouldn't have been able to return to the bank safely. However, Bo Luo, who was on the wooden raft, wasn't lucky enough to reach the bank. He was pushed into the middle of the river together with the wooden raft. Also, the strange fish didn't attack with all its might. Instead, it swam around the wooden raft as if it was playing. Occasionally, it would hit the wooden raft, causing it to shake violently. The strange fish in the river probably lost interest in teasing its prey. It gradually floated up and revealed its body. Its brown striped skin looked like it was covered with a thick layer of hard scales. The reflection of the Yangguang made people feel cold. More than half of its triangular head was above the water. It was much higher than the people on the wooden raft. Its body was about 5 meters long, maybe even longer. Under the water, one could still see its swaying tail. The strange fish that had half of its body above the water seemed to be fearless. It wasn't worried that anyone would pose a threat to it at this time. Its 3-petaled mouth had already opened. Then it suddenly bit down on the wooden raft. Crack! The wooden raft, which was made of wood as thick as a person, was easily bitten open. Crack! Another mouthful went down. With every bite, the wooden raft would shake violently. The people on the wooden raft screamed in fear and retreated away from the strange fish. However, the wooden raft was only so big. Where could they retreat to? Shoot the arrows! Hurry up and shoot the arrows! The people on the bank shouted. We've already shot all the arrows. Throw stones. Continue throwing stones. No, it's useless. Why aren't my father and the others here yet? A girl wanted to cry. Not only her, but the others also felt the same. Who would have thought that they would meet such a powerful fish when they sneaked out to catch fish? They had never met such a powerful fish before. No wonder the elders in the tribe didn't allow them to get close to the water. They just wanted to catch a big fish to prove themselves. If they knew there was such a terrifying fish in the river, they definitely wouldn't have come here. This was simply courting death. The nets they made couldn't catch the strange fish at all. Some people wanted to go into the water to help, but they were stopped. At this time, a few people would die if they went into the water. The strange fish didn't want to play anymore. It wouldn't give them a chance to escape. In the middle of the river, the strange fish that had bitten half of the wooden raft was about to bite down again. After 2 more bites, it would be able to bite its prey. However, after opening its mouth, the strange fish suddenly stopped. It then dropped the wooden raft and immediately dived down. Chapter 637. Even though the strange fish reacted quickly, it was still too late. A gust of wind blew past. The surface of the river was cut open like a piece of cloth. The strange fish that had just dived into the water was caught and lifted up. Then, with a sizzling sound, the thick smell of blood filled the air. Bo Luo, who was originally on the wooden raft and wanted to jump into the river, felt a huge wave hit him. If he wasn't holding onto the raft with one hand, he would have been blown away. Bo Luo couldn't open his eyes because of the river water. There was the smell of blood in the air, and there seemed to be something else. When he opened his eyes, he saw something falling from the sky into the river in front of the raft. The waves from the impact made the raft shake even more violently. It was a strange fish that had been torn in half. After it fell into the river, the tail half sank and soon disappeared. The other half floated on the surface of the river, but did not sink. Bo Luo could still see the 3-petaled mouth of the strange fish opening and closing, but it did not have the majestic aura it had before. It was barely hanging on to life. No matter if it was the people on the raft or the people on the shore, they were all shocked by the scene just now. Just now. What was that? Bo Luo, be careful. Run. Get into the water. Get into the water. The people on the shore suddenly shouted in panic. The person on the raft also felt as if he was being watched. When he raised his head, he saw a figure rushing towards him at an extremely fast speed. He didn't even have time to jump into the water before he was grabbed into the air along with the raft. Ah! Bo Luo looked at the surface of the river that was quickly disappearing. The fear and sadness in his heart turned into a cry of despair. The moment he left the mouth of the strange fish, he fell into the claws of a bird. The reinforcements had already arrived, but at this moment they were helpless. They didn't even have time to draw their bows and arrows. With that kind of speed and that kind of size, it was definitely not a normal bird. That's a fearsome beast. The people who rushed over shouted. The people on the shore could only watch the big bird in the sky fly higher and higher. It flew further and further, and soon disappeared from their sight. Looking at the disappearing figure in the sky, a child who still wanted to run forward only regained his senses when he was forcefully pulled away from the shore. He cried. Big Brother was caught by a fearsome beast. The people who rushed over retracted their gazes and panted. They were already fast enough, but they were still one step too late. Didn't I tell you to stay away from this place? Are you all deaf? Do you want to die? The leader of the group that came over was so angry that his beard stood up. He went over to slap them one by one, but he didn't hit the crying child. After all, he had just lost his big brother. Bo Luo. He's gone. Someone asked. What else? The middle-aged man in the lead tugged at the hunting net on his body in annoyance. What else can happen after being captured by a ferocious beast? As he said that, he looked at the river's surface of the river. Bo, of course, of the fish of the river, and of the fish. But looking at the movements in the river, there should already be small fish eating the carcass. They didn't know if the carcass would be able to float over before it was eaten. This was also the reason why they rarely went into the water. The river was too dangerous. When fishing, they used wooden rafts to set up a net, and then reel it in at the riverbank. Once they left the riverbank, they had no advantage in the river. No matter how strong the net was, it couldn't make up for it. When it was close to evening, they carried the fish carcass that finally floated to the riverbank and walked back to the tribe. The atmosphere in the group was very heavy. There were also the sounds of children crying. They had also looked in the direction that the bird had flown. It was flying upstream. They held on to the mentality of just in case, and searched upstream for a while, but they didn't find any traces at all. People who had come into contact with wild beasts knew what would happen to children who were taken away by wild beasts. Similarly, people who were taken away by fearsome beasts would only become their food. The group of people returned to the tribe in silence. At the entrance of the tribe, there was a huge net made of ropes. The center of the net was densely woven. The net was painted with dark paint. If one looked at it from afar, they would be able to see the pattern on the net more clearly. It was a totem. The intersecting lines looked like a net. When Bo Luo woke up, he felt as if he had been clawed by a fearsome beast. No, he had been clawed by a fearsome beast in the first place. His consciousness slowly came back. He remembered what happened before he lost consciousness. He wasn't someone who didn't know anything. A bird that could tear the strange fish in half in one move. And with such a huge body, how could it be just a normal fearsome beast? If he was taken away by a fearsome beast, he would only be eaten. His luck was really terrible. That wasn't right either. Bo Luo moved his body and opened his eyes. The glaring light from the Yangguang almost made him cry. After a while, he raised his hand to block the light from the Yangguang. When he opened his eyes, the movement of his hand caused his whole body to hurt. He was alive. He was still alive. Thinking of this fact, Bo Luo was very excited. But what happened? Without knowing the situation around him, he didn't dare to move. Sometimes when he met a wild beast, he had to pretend to be dead. What if there was still a fearsome beast nearby? Carefully turning his head, Bo Luo saw some unfamiliar buildings and unfamiliar people. Bo Luo suddenly sat up. Around him, there were people sitting or standing. They all looked at him with curious eyes. Whose house was this? There was the sound and smell of the river. Even if he hadn't seen the river yet, he was sure of it. Also, the house was shaking slightly, just like when he was standing on the raft. Floating on the water? Which tribe's house floated on the river? Bo Luo couldn't think of anything. Yo, you're awake? A man squatting on the ground and spinning a fishing rod looked at him with a smile. You saved me? Bo Luo asked. He had never seen these people before. They didn't look like people from any of the tribes he knew. He could tell just by feeling. These people looked very strong. Even the girl next to him, who looked about the same as his sister, was playing with a big river shell with one hand. It looked like she was just throwing a small stone. Although these people didn't look fierce, when they stared at Bo Luo, he felt like he was being stared at by a beast in the forest. He couldn't help but shiver. You could say that, said the young man sitting on a short wooden stump. What did he mean by you could say that? Bo Luo's excitement from finding out that he was still alive had subsided. His mind was racing as he looked at the people in front of him. How was he saved by these people? Did they fight with a fearsome beast? Or was it that the ferocious beast that caught him abandoned him midway and ran away? How did you meet me? Did you see a very big bird? A fearsome beast. It must be a fearsome beast, Bo Luo asked. After he asked, Bo Luo realized that the atmosphere was strange. The people in front of him all smiled at him. He felt like something was wrong. Bo Luo scratched the goosebumps on his arms. Sensing something, Bo Luo turned his head and looked behind him. Then he slowly raised his head. A big bird 4 times his height was standing there, staring at him. After a moment of silence, Chapter 638. Bo Luo was shocked by the scene in front of him. He thought that these people had saved him, but he didn't expect that these people were in cahoots with the ferocious beast that had captured him. Humans and ferocious beasts were in cahoots? It was hard to imagine. Bo Luo had always thought that he was a brave person, but from the incident when he was fishing to what he was seeing right now, each incident was more shocking than the last. Looking back at the people around him who were still calm, and then looking at the giant bird standing behind him, he wanted to scream again, but he still suppressed the shock in his heart. He took a deep breath, calmed down his turbulent emotions, and tried his best to calm himself down and think about what to do next. You guys. Bo Luo pointed at the bird behind him and looked at the people around him. He suddenly didn't know what to ask. Seeing that he was shocked, Xiao Xian didn't beat around the bush and said, "Although I don't know what exactly happened, I think that it saved you." "Saved me? It almost ate me." Bo Luo was about to refute, but after thinking about it, he realized that it was true. If this bird hadn't appeared, he would have probably been eaten by the strange fish in the river. But why did this bird bring him here after killing the fish? Where is this? Who are you guys? Bo Luo stood up and looked around. Just as Bo Luo thought, they were still on the same river. "We are the expedition team from the Yinjiao tribe," Xiao Xian said. "We don't know where we are. We are just following the river downstream." Yinjiao tribe. Bo Luo was thinking about how to go back when he suddenly heard Xiao Xian's answer. He looked at Xiao Xian's group in shock. "You guys are from Yinjiao?" Seeing Bo Luo's reaction, Duo Li and the others were also curious. "You know about the Yinjiao tribe?" I've heard of you." Bo Luo looked at the people in front of him and didn't say anything else. The caution in his eyes was still there, but there was a hint of curiosity. "I heard that Yinjiao hosted a banquet to show off your wealth? Is that true?" Bo Luo couldn't help but ask again. He couldn't imagine that there would be a tribe that could hold a banquet. He didn't know what a banquet was before, but after listening to his father's explanation, he finally understood. Was there really a tribe that was that rich? Of course, and the banquet ended before the rainy season. At that time, only 24 tribes went over. After the banquet, when the Flaming River trading point opened, more tribes went over. "Didn't your tribe go over to take a look?" Duo Li grinned as he came over. "It's over." "Where is the Flaming River trading point?" He actually went to so many tribes. "Our tribe is too far away, so we couldn't go." Bo Luo's eyes dimmed. He wanted to see it too, but unfortunately sigh. "Which tribe are you from? If it's on the way, we can send you back," Duo Li asked. After some hesitation, Bo Luo said, "I'm from the Drumming tribe. My name is Bo Luo." The Drumming tribe? It really was the Drumming tribe. Before Bo Luo woke up, Xiao Xian and the others had already guessed Bo Luo's identity. Xiao Xian said that he was most likely from the Drumming tribe. "You're from the Drumming tribe?" Duo Li pointed at the two nets on the side. "That means someone from your tribe went to the Flaming River trading point." Seeing the two nets, Bo Luo's eyes lit up. He said excitedly, "My father brought those nets." After saying that, Bo Luo realized that he had said too much. His father had said that before they knew what the Yinjiao people were like, they had to be careful. Although these Yinjiao people had saved him, it was always better to be careful. The Yinjiao tribe seemed to be stronger than their own. Duo Li didn't seem to notice the wariness in Bo Luo's eyes. He continued, "Then why didn't you go with your father? Our Yinjiao's Flaming River trading point is very popular. Fearsome beast meat, fearsome beast hides, fearsome beast horns are all very famous." Hearing Duo Li's words, Bo Luo temporarily put his thoughts aside. "It's too far and the road is too dangerous. My father wouldn't let us go. Your tribe even sells fearsome beasts." "That's amazing." He of course," Duo Li said proudly. He walked over and put his arm around Bo Luo's shoulder enthusiastically. They started chatting and briefly introduced the people around them to Bo Luo. He only introduced them by name and made a few jokes. As for their positions and abilities, he didn't say a word. When Bo Luo said that he had led a group of people to fish and encountered danger, he had attracted the attention of the strange fish himself, so that the others had time to escape. Duo Li guessed that Bo Luo wasn't a normal person in the Drumming tribe. Being able to lead a group of people to hunt. Fishing was also considered hunting. The leader must have a certain level of influence and reputation in the tribe. If he wasn't strong enough, then he must have the influence of his elders. In the tribe, the higher the position, the greater the responsibility. When there was danger, the greater the pressure on their shoulders. In the tribe, there was no such thing as sacrificing a pawn to protect the general. When there was danger, the person with a high position had to stand at the front and block it. When they couldn't block it and had to retreat, they had to do the most dangerous thing. Bo Luo happened to be doing this kind of thing. That was why Duo Li wanted to talk to Bo Luo more. Maybe he could find out more. "We're almost there," Xiao Xian suddenly said. "What?" Boluo didn't understand Xiao Xian's words for a moment. Duo Li and the others also looked at Xiao Xian. Xiao Xian stood up. We're almost there. Really? Boluo was instantly excited. Nothing was as happy as returning to the tribe alive. Duo Li jumped onto the mast and stood high up. He took out Xiao Xian's telescope and looked into the distance. There were too many trees, and he couldn't see much at the moment. But since Xiao Xian said that they were almost there, then it must be true. Boluo was excited, but then he suddenly thought. These people had never been to the drumming tribe before. How did they know that they were almost there? Just as he was about to ask, Boluo turned around and saw Xiao Xian striding towards the ferocious bird. He jumped onto the bird's back. The boat shook violently, and Boluo almost lost his balance and fell. With a whoosh, a strong gust of wind blew past. Boluo looked into the sky and saw that the giant bird had already taken flight. It was flying high and far away. The people from Yinjiao could actually tame ferocious beasts. They rode on such a huge bird and flew into the sky. Boluo's eyes widened as he watched the giant bird fly into the distance. After a while, Cha-Cha flew back, but this time it didn't land on the boat. After Xiao Xian jumped off, Cha-Cha flew directly into the sky. It didn't leave but followed Xiao Xian's boat. That pineapple. After Xiao Xian finished drawing on the animal skin scroll, he looked at the person who was standing there, thinking about something. Boluo was confused. You're calling me? Yes, I'm calling you. Pineapple, can you contact the people in your tribe directly? Like blowing a whistle or something, Xiao Xian asked. My name is Boluo, not Pineapple. Boluo corrected him. He thought about Xiao Xian's words and nodded. Yes. Do you want to blow it now? Wait, we haven't arrived yet. They might not be able to hear you even if you blow it now. I'll tell you when we arrive. Okay. Boluo was very happy to be able to return to his tribe, but he was also very conflicted. He didn't know if bringing the people from Yinjiao back to his tribe was the right decision. Xiao Xian stood at the bow of the boat and looked in a direction. In his mindscape, within the light shield wrapped in totemic flames, a pattern gradually became clearer. It was a totem wrapped in yellow flames. The lines of the totem pattern were intertwined and looked like a woven net. Chapter 639. In the drumming tribe, houses could be seen everywhere. They had a similar architectural style to the drumming tribe, with wooden pillars as the base. However, the wooden pillars here were taller and thicker. The houses were at least 6 to 7 meters above the ground. The taller ones were even more than 10 meters. Also, these houses were not square. Instead, they were round and pointed. The roofs were covered with brown cloth. The bigger houses were more than 20 meters in diameter, while the smaller houses were less than 4 meters in diameter. Below the houses, there were many nets wrapped around the wooden pillars. These nets were divided into many layers, and each layer had something on it. Some were food, some were clothes, etc. Some of the nets below the houses were very complicated. It looked very messy, but it was just a look. There were people resting inside the nets. The ropes and nets could be used as hammocks for people to lie on, and also for drying items. At this moment, in the center of the drumming tribe, in the largest house, the atmosphere was heavy. Is Boluo really gone? The person who spoke had messy hair. His clothes were torn in many places, as if they had been scratched by tree branches. There were dried blood stains, and a fishy smell on his body. His tired eyes were bloodshot and hazy. The muscles on his face twitched, and the veins on his arms twitched. It was obvious that he was in a very bad mood, as if he was about to explode at any moment. The person sitting by the door replied, Yes. When I arrived, I saw Boluo being taken away by the beasts. The house was silent again. The air seemed to have frozen for a moment. Actually, Boluo might still be alive. In the silence, a voice spoke slowly, dispelling the oppressive atmosphere in the house. The person who spoke was a thin middle-aged man, sitting in the innermost part of the room. Although he didn't look old, there was a hint of white in his hair. At this time, his white hair and dark brown hair were intertwined brown and white. It looked like a checkerboard that was squeezed together in rows, and his hair was longer than his shoulders. My injuries haven't healed yet, so I can't confirm Boluo's location. However, I can feel that he is still alive, said the person. But he was taken away by the beasts. Where can we find him? The person sitting near the door was troubled. He looked at the person who was surrounded by an oppressive atmosphere. Bogu, what's your decision? Bogu rubbed his red eyes. He had rushed back continuously and was already exhausted. He didn't expect to hear that his son had been taken away by the beasts the moment he returned. He was angry and sad. But there were too many things he had to face now. What to do? He had no idea either. Even if the people who were captured by the beasts were still alive, they probably wouldn't be able to live for long. With a heavy sigh, Bogu was about to say something when he heard the gray-haired person sitting at the innermost part of the table say, This shout was not directed at the people in the room, but he had sensed something else. What's wrong, shaman? The people in the room looked over. The brown-haired man didn't say anything. Instead, he looked in a certain direction. Although he couldn't see anything due to the cover of the house, the people in the house knew that there was something unusual going on in that direction. Just as they were puzzled, they suddenly heard a series of whining sounds, which sounded like the cries of some kind of water bird. The voice came from afar. If it was someone with poor hearing, it would be difficult for them to hear it. However, everyone in the room could hear the voice. When the people in the room heard the voice, they raised their eyebrows. Their eyes flashed and without saying anything, they rushed out of the room. Bogu dashed out of the house that was more than 10 meters high. Before he landed, he hooked his hand and used the net rope tied to the wooden frame to slow down his fall. Zung! Bogu's entire body was like a rock that was falling rapidly. Suddenly, he turned into a leaf and landed lightly on the ground. The sound was like a small pebble landing on the grass. It was so small that it was hard to hear. After landing, Bogu and the others who came out of the house ran towards the direction of the sound and disappeared in a blink of an eye. After they left, the brown-haired man who was sitting cross-legged in the room slowly walked out and looked towards the river. He was puzzled. Someone from another tribe? At this time, which tribe did they come from? He could sense that the person was definitely not from a nearby tribe. He also didn't know anyone from a tribe. He had never met anyone from another tribe before. Plus, the person who came gave him a very different feeling. It was very different from the people from other tribes he had met before. As for what exactly was different, he couldn't tell. Not long after, someone rushed back to the tribe from afar. As he ran, he shouted, "Boluo is back! Boluo, that kid is back!" Hearing the commotion, the people who came out of their houses started shouting. What? Wasn't Boluo taken away by a fearsome beast? Boluo is still alive. Where is he? Was he bitten by a fearsome beast? I want to go and see. No, don't run around. If you do, I'll beat you up. Stay in your houses. Ignoring the people who were talking, the person who came back ran directly to the biggest house. Using the net rope tied to the wooden frame, he jumped up as if he was stepping on a staircase. Shaman, someone brought Boluo back, the person said. Who? The Gu shaman frowned. Bogu said it was someone from Yinjiao. Yinjiao? So fast. The Gu shaman was surprised. Bogu just came back from Yinjiao's trading point. He didn't even have time to talk about what happened there. But someone from Yinjiao had already come to the Gu tribe's territory. When Xiao Xian sensed that the Gu tribe was getting closer, he let Boluo send a signal. Actually, Boluo already felt that the scenery on the shore was familiar. He had been here before when he went hunting. However, he knew that they weren't in the tribe's territory yet, so he didn't blow the whistle. Still, his uneasiness was greatly relieved. When Xiao Xian learned how to let Boluo blow the whistle, Boluo immediately blew a whistle that only the people of the Gu tribe could understand. The whistle was made from 2 thumbs placed together. Those who didn't know how to make it would have a hard time blowing it. Even if they did, they wouldn't be able to produce the same rhythm as the Gu tribe's whistle, let alone use this kind of whistle to send simple messages. Now that Boluo saw his tribesmen, his anxious heart finally calmed down. When he saw that his father was among the people on the shore, he was so excited that he wanted to jump onto the shore immediately. However, the Yinjiao's boat was still some distance away from the shore. Even though they were sailing close to the shore, it wasn't good to get too close. The water was shallow and dangerous. Most of the people from the Gu tribe were surprised to see these floating houses for the first time. Bogu had seen boats before. At the Flaming River trading point, there weren't only Yinjiao boats. There were also other tribes that went to the trading point via the waterway. That was why when he saw Xiaoxian's boat, Bogu didn't have much of a reaction. He was only surprised that Yinjiao had boats coming from downstream and arrived so quickly. There definitely wouldn't be any movement during the rainy season. So these Yinjiao people must have set off after the rainy season. It should be around the same time as when they came back from the trading point. However, they tried their best to get back to the tribe as quickly as possible. Sometimes they didn't even rest at night, and half of them were exhausted by the time they got back. Those people were probably still asleep now. If it wasn't for Bo Luo, Bo Gu would be resting at home too. However, these Yinjiao people looked very energetic. Was it because of the boat? Bo Gu was deep in thought when he heard the Yinjiao's boat approaching the shore. He looked over. Bo Luo couldn't wait any longer. He jumped off the boat before it even stopped and ran over excitedly. He had survived a disaster and returned safely to the tribe. He even saw his father return. How could Bo Luo not be happy? However, what greeted Bo Luo was his father's fist. "You're disobedient. I'll teach you a lesson." Bo Gu swung his fist at Bo Luo, who was running over. While Bo Gu was scolding his son, Xiaoxian and the rest got off the boat. The Gu tribesmen who came to the shore stared curiously at Xiaoxian and the rest. Many of them were cautious and scrutinizing. At this moment, the Gu shaman also came to the shore. "Welcome to the Gu tribe." Xiaoxian looked at the Gu shaman, who smiled at them. Why did he feel like he didn't want to come? Chapter 640. Xiaoxian's intuition was right. The drumming tribesmen were slightly repulsed by them. As for why they didn't express it, it was probably because they were afraid of the Yinjiao tribe. Even though Xiaoxian's group saved Bo Luo, and even though Cha-Cha captured him after saving him, they still saved him. However, the drumming tribesmen were very strange. They seemed to want Xiaoxian's group to leave as soon as possible. Xiaoxian could understand why they were repulsed by an unfamiliar tribe. Especially a tribe stronger than them. They would be wary of them. However, Xiaoxian felt that there was something else going on here. Even so, the drumming tribesmen still welcomed Xiaoxian's group to the drumming tribe's resting place. They were guests who had saved the drumming tribesmen before, so they couldn't draw a clear line between them. The drumming tribe didn't want to fall out with the Yinjiao tribe yet. The drumming tribesmen were very cautious towards Xiaoxian's group of Yinjiao tribesmen. Bo Gu and the others had been to the Flaming River trading point before, so they knew more about the Yinjiao tribe than the others. They were inexplicably nervous when they saw Xiaoxian. The drumming tribesmen mostly wore linen. It looked like it was woven quite well, and the workmanship was exquisite. This was probably made by their own tribe, and it wasn't any worse than the ones made by the Rain tribe. However, their linen clothes were still wrapped with some unrefined, tassel-like hemp fibers. The drumming tribesmen were used to this, so they didn't feel uncomfortable with the hemp fibers tied around their bodies. When Bo Luo was brought to Xiaoxian's ship, his clothes were already severely damaged, so the hemp fibers weren't obvious. Now that Xiaoxian saw so many drumming tribesmen here, it was obvious that they were wearing a unique outfit. Seeing that Xiaoxian was curious about the hemp fibers tied around their bodies, Bo Gu explained, "The drumming tribe is good at making nets. We always bring nets with us when we go out, but sometimes our nets get damaged from hunting, so we use these to repair them." "I see." With Bo Gu's explanation, Xiaoxian understood. Different nets had different thicknesses, so the ropes used were also different. Therefore, the people of the drumming tribe brought raw materials with them and used hemp fibers to repair the nets. No wonder the people of the drumming tribe had different kinds of hemp fibers. It must be because they used different materials to make their nets, so they had different kinds of hemp fibers wrapped around their clothes. It could be used for decoration, as well as practicality. Xiaoxian and the others didn't think much of Bo Gu's attitude, but some of the Ji tribesmen had weird looks on their faces. Logically speaking, Xiao Xian and the rest had saved Bogu's son, so it was reasonable for them to be polite. However, the people in the Gu tribe who knew Bogu were still surprised because Bogu was too polite. Who was Bogu? The current chief of the drumming tribe. Although the chief's position in the Gu tribe was not as high as the shaman, he was still a chief. It was rare to see Bogu take the initiative to introduce or explain things to strangers. In the past, when outsiders came to the Gu tribe to interact with other tribes, Bogu would always give them the cold shoulder. However, Bogu's attitude was strange today. When they brought Xiao Xian and the rest into the tribe, the people who came back to rest with Bogu were woken up by the commotion. They ran out to see what was going on. When they saw Xiao Xian and the rest, they first looked at Xiao Xian and the rest in disbelief. They probably thought that they were still asleep, so they rubbed their faces with their palms. When they looked over, they continued to stare at them with wide eyes. After confirming that it was Xiao Xian, they hurried over and glanced at Xiao Xian from time to time, sizing him up. "You know me?" Xiao Xian suddenly asked. Bogu, who was thinking of how to greet the Yinjiao people, was shocked. He looked around and understood what was going on, so he didn't hide it. "We just came back from the Flaming River trading point. When we were there, we met Yinjiao's Grand Elder." The Gu shaman in the middle looked at Xiao Xian. The other Gu tribesmen didn't seem to understand. They looked at Xiao Xian, then at Bogu, then at Xiao Xian. "Grand Elder? This kid? Bogu, are you sure?" Bo Luo, who was beaten up, couldn't care less about the injuries on his face. "What, he's the Grand Elder?" The Gu tribe had elders too. Their elders were the same as other tribes. They were either appointed by the previous chief or shaman after they retired, or they were appointed by those who contributed greatly to the tribe. However, this young man, Xiao Xian, was also an elder? And the Grand Elder? And the Yinjiao's Grand Elder? They couldn't accept it all at once. No wonder Bogu was so polite to this kid. This must be the reason. The others had their own guesses. But Bogu and the others who had been to the Flaming River trading point knew that the Yinjiao's Grand Elder had a special status. The Yinjiao tribesmen seemed to respect this young Grand Elder. Plus, when Bogu asked around at the trading point, he found out that not only the Yinjiao tribesmen, but many other tribes were also wary of this Grand Elder. When they talked about this Yinjiao's Grand Elder, it was as if they had met a ferocious beast. Xiao Xian brought 100 people into the Gu tribe, while the other 100 guarded the boats by the river. The Gu tribe had more than 3,000 people. Although this number couldn't be compared to Yinjiao's 20,000 people, it was considered a good number among the smaller tribes. The Gu tribe didn't lack food either. Fresh wild beast meat was enough to fill their stomachs. In order to welcome and thank Xiao Xian and the others for saving Bo Luo, the Gu tribe held a feast in the afternoon. It wasn't a feast to show off their wealth, just a normal welcome feast. They roasted meat over a fire and cooked soup in a clay pot. During this time, the Gu shaman even talked to Xiao Xian and the others. He mainly asked about Xiao Xian and the others' purpose for coming here. When he found out that Xiao Xian and the others were just taking a stroll along the Flaming River, the Gu shaman heaved a sigh of relief. He didn't show it on his face, but Xiao Xian could feel it. The Gu tribesmen were courteous, but overall, they seemed to want them to leave as soon as possible. The Gu shaman took the initiative to tell Xiao Xian about the tribes further downstream. He even mentioned that there was a tribe downstream that produced beautiful beads. This interested the Yinjiao tribesmen, especially Duo Li. His eyes lit up when he heard this. "What kind of bead?" Duo Li asked. The Gu shaman took out a bead the size of a thumbnail from his pocket. "Cat's eye stone?" Xiao Xian was surprised. He took the bead and examined it closely. It didn't look like it was made by humans. It looked more like it was formed naturally. However, these beads looked slightly murky, and the eye in the middle was a little dim. This was enough to make Duo Li and the others, who came from the other side of the sea, interested. On the other side of the sea, because the slave masters liked all kinds of beautiful gemstones, these stones that couldn't be made into weapons were often more expensive than grains or animal hides. Seeing that the Yinjiao tribesmen were so interested in these beads, the Gu shaman's smile deepened. After the afternoon meal, the sky darkened. The Gu tribesmen began to head back to their homes. Xiao Xian and the others didn't stay in the house the Gu tribe arranged for them. Instead, they returned to the ship. Although it would be more comfortable to stay in a house, the Gu tribe's fire seed was still there. It wasn't as comfortable. That was why they returned to the ship to rest. However, when Xiao Xian and the others walked towards the river, the Gu shaman said, "Be careful in the water at night." Chapter 641. The shaman's words alerted the Yinjiao people. The Gu tribesmen had told them that the river was dangerous, that there might be strange fish or something else. Several Gu tribesmen had disappeared from the river before, and there were more and more beasts in the forest. Xiao Xian's group would sometimes rest at the bank at night, and they'd encountered some trouble, but it was nothing compared to the beasts in the forest. But this time, Xiao Xian didn't dare to be careless. The Gu tribesmen couldn't find the reason for their loss, and they didn't want to die without knowing anything. "The night watchers will be on high alert at night," Xiao Xian said to them after returning to the boat. After Xiao Xian's group left, the Gu tribesmen stopped adding firewood to the fire on the grass and waited for the fire to go out. Gusts of wind blew, and the firewood in the fire flickered with red light. In the shaman's house, other than the shaman, there were 10 other people. They were all important figures in the Gu tribe, including Bo Gu and the elders of the tribe. There was a glowing water moon stone in the house. For tribes like them who built their houses on the ground, they used glowing stones to light up their houses at night, and not firewood. Using firewood or torches could easily set the house on fire. Other than the water moon stone, there were other stones, but the water moon stone was more commonly used. They traded for it through other people. "Shaman, do you think the Yinjiao people noticed something?" someone asked. "It's better if they noticed, maybe they'll leave immediately." But the Gu tribesman's eyes were closed, and no one could see his expression. "What if they don't leave and stay here for a few more days?" that person asked again. "Then there's no other way. Didn't they say the Yinjiao people are very strong and can hunt beasts? If they help, how do you know the Yinjiao people will help us? What if they take the opportunity to do something else, or steal our things? What should we do?" an elder asked worriedly. "I don't think so," Bo Gu said. "This trip to the Flaming River trading point has allowed me to see many things that I've never seen before. As for the Yinjiao tribe, I don't think they'll steal our things." "That's just what you think. Who knows if Yinjiao will take advantage of the chaos to rob us, or secretly attack us? Although there are only 200 of them, everyone should know that they aren't easy to deal with. Besides, there's also Yinjiao's grand elder." The old man became even more worried. Yinjiao's great elder is a bit strange. The shaman of the drumming tribe was confused when he heard them mention the great elder of Yinjiao. He always felt that the great elder of Yinjiao was different from the others. No, everyone in Yinjiao was different from the tribesmen he had seen. The only difference was that the great elder of Yinjiao was different. "It doesn't matter if Yinjiao leaves or not. What we need to do now is to prevent more and more beasts from attacking our tribe." Speaking of this, the shaman of the drumming tribe suddenly emitted a murderous aura, like a net full of sharp blades. His sharp eyes looked into the darkness outside the house, as if he wanted to pierce through the darkness and find the hidden figure. The night deepened. Although the moon cast a faint silver glow over the night sky, it was still mostly dark under the forest. The forest was very dense. The trees near the drumming tribe's resting place were taller than their houses. The branches stretched out and blocked the moonlight, casting large shadows on the rounded roofs. The noise in the tribe gradually quieted down. Some people fell asleep while others kept their eyes open, listening to the sounds outside. In the forest, the guards were hidden, almost blending into the night. Even their breaths seemed to synchronize with the night breeze. On the boat by the river, the night watchers stared at the surface of the river, while the people in the cabin rested. The flaming river's water was swept by the night breeze, crashing against the shore in waves. When the water hit the rocks, it made splashing sounds. The boat swayed slightly on the surface of the river, making creaking sounds. Xiao Xian was sleeping with his eyes closed. He suddenly opened his eyes, got off his bed and walked out of the cabin. The night watchers saw Xiao Xian come out, so they quickly asked, Grand Elder. Did you notice something? What did you find? Xiaoxian asked. The night watchers looked at each other and thought for a while, then said, I just feel that something is not right. There was a noise in the forest just now. It should be from the drumming tribe. Maybe a beast fell into the drumming tribe's trap, and there was a short fight. But the beast probably ran away, and there's no movement now. The river is not calm either, but we can't tell exactly where. The people Xiaoxian brought out were all experienced hunters. Their instincts were very sharp. Although they might not be very accurate, they could still sense the general situation. What's wrong? Tua walked out of the cabin and looked around. He suddenly said, The river is very quiet. The night watchers said that the river was not calm, but Tua said that it was very quiet. This was not contradictory. It was because of this silence that it seemed strange. In the past, even at night, there would be fish floating on the surface of the river from time to time. The fish's tail would stir the water and make a sound. Some would even jump, and then fall into the water, and make a splash. There were also fish that would hunt for insects on the shore, and dive into the shallow water to ambush and attack at any time. But now, there was no sound of fish hunting on the shore. There was no movement of fish floating on the surface of the river. There was no sound of fish jumping either. Other than the waves caused by the night wind, there was nothing else. Under this calm appearance, there was something else hidden. Xiaoxian glanced around the river and then looked upstream. You guys stay here. I'll go take a look. As he spoke, Xiaoxian jumped off the boat and quietly went upstream along the forest. I'll go too. Tua jumped off behind Xiaoxian. He did not hear any objections from Xiaoxian, so he continued to follow. It was too dangerous for Xiaoxian to go alone. If he followed, he could help. If it was completely dark, Tuo's movements would be greatly limited. But now the moonlight was getting brighter and brighter, so Tuo's vision would be less disturbed. This was also why Xiaoxian agreed to let Tua follow. The river bank was still some distance away from the drumming tribe's habitat. The fire seed aura of the drumming tribe here was also very weak. Xiaoxian shuttled through the forest on the shore, running and stopping. Under the cover of the rustling of the leaves in the night wind, he approached upstream. Tua was following behind Xiaoxian. Seeing Xiaoxian suddenly stop, he hurriedly stopped and gestured to Xiaoxian. Is there a problem? Xiaoxian signaled him to be patient and wait. Tua held his breath and carefully listened to the movements around him. The next moment he suddenly felt his scalp go numb. The night wind seemed to have dropped to the freezing point, and a chill rushed up his spine, making him want to shiver. All the blood in his body was screaming that there was danger here. There was the sound of water not far away, as if something was coming out of the river. But when Tua was thinking about what to do next, that feeling quickly disappeared. The sense of crisis that made his back sweat gradually receded. Tua then carefully breathed. After the sense of crisis completely disappeared, there was a sudden rustling sound on the shore, as if something was walking on the grass. Tua stopped wiping his cold sweat and looked at Xiaoxian. Should we do something? There was no strong sense of crisis, so the sound just now should be from other nocturnal beasts. Tua did not need to worry about this. But Xiaoxian waved his hand and signaled Tua to continue to wait. The rustling sound disappeared, and the shore was quiet again. Xiaoxian moved closer to the riverbank, and then found a suitable place to hide in a tree. He let the branches cover his body, and through the gaps between the branches, he looked at the riverbank where he heard the sound of water just now. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.